Hello humans, wizards, pragmatists, warlocks, neo-romantics, water babies, and members of Alf's Imperial Army. I'm Ryan Ferris, and welcome to The Good Timeline. The Good Timeline is the place where we examine the global force of transhumanism, the self-directed transformation of humans into something very different from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and how we might best make that transition. I'm honoured to present to you all today Jack, the Wizard of New Zealand, and his apprentice, Ari Freeman. The Wizard was decreed a living work of art by the New Zealand Art Gallery Directors Council in 1982, named the official Wizard of New Zealand by Prime Minister Michael Moore in 1990, and was awarded the Queen's Service Medal in 2009. He is arrayed in the town square of Christchurch from 1974 to 2009, and as far as we know is the world's most famous and oldest living real-life wizard. He is well known in New Zealand and especially here in Christchurch. Many, including myself, remember him orating as a sort of bizarre town crier in the square of Christchurch as we were growing up. My father tells stories of the wizard causing chaos at student parties and university events in the 1970s with Alf's Imperial Army, an instrument of the wizard's fun revolution which carried out theatrical, non-violent battles and war in spots all across the country, including a British imperialist invasion of Akaroa. The wizard has long been a controversial figure and pulls no punches in his disgust of bureaucracy and modernism. He has caused many stirs over the years and is self-described as radical, with an emphasis on the romantic values of love, logic, and liberty, all tied together with a strong emphasis on fun. When I spoke some weeks back on episode 45 to Mango Dogwood of Cacophony, the underground society that sparked Burning Man and Fight Club, I was reminded of the wizard, and with some small digging, I realised his work predates the cacophonists by decades. While I definitely don't agree with everything the wizard says, I do find the romantic revival values very compelling, values which cacophony seems to share also. These place fun, love, freedom, beauty, community as most important, and instrumentalist means-to-end, purely goal-orientated values as less important, and with a high potential of being destructive when unchecked. The wizard's apprentice and prolific musician Ari Freeman is also well known in Christchurch. He publishes blogs which are to be made into a book, grounding esoteric, magical, and occult ideas within the philosophical framework of pragmatism. If you'd like to read more about the wizards, check out the show notes on thegoodtimeline.com. I won't speak anymore, so please enjoy this radical and most importantly fun conversation with Ari Freeman and Jack, the Wizard of New Zealand. It's not often I find myself in the company of wizards. Yeah. Two wizards I initially thought, but there's three here.
There's three, yeah.
It's another one hiding in the corner there. So I thought it'd be good to start with the basics, and this is the question for both of you guys with mics there. Ari and Jack. Is it okay if I call you Jack?
Yeah, I'm always called Jack.
So what is a wizard, and subsequently, what is magic? So this is for both of you guys. You can answer it separately or together if you like.
Well, I think being a wizard is being an ancient person. It's like being a hunter-gatherer. Because when agriculture came into the world, it introduced the idea of property, ownership of land, ownership of people, and the idea of the immortal soul being the key thing that everything circulated around, that you had to become immortal, which I see as an ego trip of a dangerous sight, but that's just my own feeling. Being immortal, you pay a terrible price for that a price of obedience to the priests. You become full of the idea of good and evil. You then have all this eating of the apple, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that's the horror, is that you begin to think you can judge good from evil, which is a very arrogant viewpoint. I know what I like and don't like. It's not got the same thing as good and evil. And I know things that horrify me and disgust me, but it's not the same thing as good and evil. So going to that extreme was the fall of man. We're getting back to the first foundation. I mean, now know where it took place. The discoveries in southern Turkey of Göbekli Tepe, and the city near it, the first agricultural community, where they lived unhealthy lives, they were crippled with arthritis, they lived in a miserable existence. The women took over largely too, so the men couldn't get away and go hunting, and they would suffer from any adverse climatic change. They couldn't move. If they were invaded, they couldn't fight back. It was, to me, a fall. Now, can we get back to that period in any rational plan be laid for this? And I think it can be done slowly. So getting back to the magic, because magic is more ancient than religion, and shamanism was the world's oldest profession for tens of thousands of years. We know the hunter-gatherers actually terraformed the environment. They altered the path of rivers. They decorated the rocks of the hillsides. They built caves full of interesting, almost moving animals, a kind of cinema. And they lived in what could be called a sustainable relationship with the environment, which agriculture is not sustainable with the environment. We have to learn that point. So the dreamer peasant society, as you get in Lord of the Rings and other fantasies, is not the end of my direction. I'm trying to make the great leap backward. The first step back would be towards industrial capitalism, which is based on national values, in which you have universities and schools, but you can still have free speech, which was the great advantage of capitalism, was free speech was allowed. It's gone now. We've entered into a worse period than capitalism. This period of consumerism is the ultimate horror to me. So people believe that they've chosen to do things they had no choice in. It was careful conditioning, not being trained to learn how to achieve things, but how to respond to what's going on around you. So that's why I personally began in 1970, and it's a long time ago now, to design a different universe which I could live in. I wasn't given any alternative, because the last universe that was designed by human beings was in the 12th century, Thomas Aquinas. Otherwise, we've got a mechanical machine. You learn how the machine works and you get rich and famous, and that's about it. So, and they regarded all religion as silly nonsense and science as true, which isn't entirely true either. So it was a choice I made intellectually and consciously as an academic at university, when I tried to reform university by being playful and not getting ego trips out of confronting the enemy. In other words, we didn't treat our enemy as evil. We just treated them as people we thought were wrong, but we could be brought round if we were nice enough and polite and made fun. And if they made mistakes, we didn't notice them. We didn't ignored it. And you give the boss all the credit all the time. Usual things which an egotist can't do. Now, I have an ego, but it's under control. I can expand it and make it huge and be number one, or I can be a nobody at the back of the class. And that control of the ego is the clue to being a wizard. I'm convinced it's the clue. And then you can introduce deliberately cognitive dissonance. You can set one set of ideas against another one, and then you rise above them both and give them the solution, which is not to take it too seriously. And so Ari was watching me, and I presume he's the first person to actually watch me and decide to make the adjustment. Ian was always there with me. He went through an experience in the square as a schoolboy where he was bored stiff by school, but he loved music so much. It was his life, was to play music. This other stuff was a waste of time. He didn't even read anything. He was just there playing his music in the evenings and putting up with it all. But he's had almost no academic training as I've had. But he's now training himself up. He watches a lot of YouTube. He reads a lot of books. He's going to catching up a bit. But he's a natural wizard, I would say, in the sense that he doesn't respond to emotional blackmail, doesn't feel guilty easily, doesn't get on the high moral ground, just gets pissed off, which is quite a natural thing to do. And he's been devoted his life over the last almost 50 years to saving folk music, especially of the traditional type played in New Zealand in the 19th century, and performing it. He can't do barn dance. He'd like to do them, but he does weddings and birthdays, a bit like that. So he's under the radar quite a lot. Everyone knows him. He's been such a long time now, and he's been my best friend since that time, which is the early 70s. Ari's an entirely different case. He's coming at it from a different direction, and I'd like Ari to explain what he thinks magic is and what he thinks a wizard is and what way he's heading.
Thank you, Jack. So I've been Jack's right-hand man. I guess Jack has two right-hand men. He's got Ian and me. Ian works behind the scenes as a massive help, especially with Jack's records, which are numerous because he's been a public wizard for well over 50 years now. I help Jack more with his public stuff, and I'm also got two roles. I collect people who want to be wizards around the world, so I've helped get in touch. Sometimes they approach Jack, sometimes they approach me. but on social media, I've been interacting with people who are working as public wizards or interested in doing so. So I run a catchment area for people interested in that stuff. So we're in touch with 3 American wizards who are doing a very good job, and a few other people around New Zealand, and there's sort of whisperings in other countries too. So Jack's currently finishing off a book that he's been working on for years and years. That's the real big textbook on his life and how he functions as a wizard. I'm also working on a book, and my book is to try and introduce people, especially intelligent people who think they don't believe in magic, as to how magic works in the world. So it's sort of an entry book for people who might have a good academic background, or the type of thing that we're seeing on YouTube and you're trying to do here with your podcast, like good long form stuff with meaty material that's interesting. So I'll define the 2 things, wizard and magic, and then I'll pass it back to Jack. Wizard is an old Anglo-Saxon word that's the same thing as Old English, and the wiz is wise, same word, and art is just the suffix. And the suffix just denotes one who does. So it's just one who does wisdom, as far as I'm concerned, or a wise one. So the context for a wizard is, I consider it a role, and Jack is the first modern wizard and the oldest living wizard. And it's someone who is out in the community as taking that wise man role. Now, it doesn't mean that these people necessarily are wise. They work with wisdom. They are interested in wisdom, and they engage with wisdom. No one ever actually becomes wise, and if you do, then you're a wise ass, not a wizard. But it's someone who engages with this. So they're usually the person in the village. In the old days, they were the shaman, etc. They were the people in the village who were allowed, it was permissible for them to go a little bit outside the box, go a little bit weird, and like most of the time maybe they're there for entertainment and that sort of thing, but occasionally they bring something really useful, some amazing idea or premonition or interesting concept that's actually very useful to their tribe and their tribe's mental health and that sort of thing. So we get out in the public. A lot of it is people taking pictures of us. The way a wizard looks, the archetypical wizard, Gandalf, that sort of thing, is a hangover from Odin. It's the way Odin would appear in the world in Norse mythology when he was walking around in the human world, and he would call himself Greybeard. The pointy hat seems to come from a couple of sources. It's similar to a hat that Jewish, especially Orthodox Jewish people wear, and they have a wise man tradition as well. And it also seems to come from the Magi, who were the Persians, the Persian priest class, and that's where we get the term magic from, Magi. And the pointy hat points towards heaven as something to aspire to that you're never going to fully reach in your lifetime. So that's my take on wizard. Magic, in order to make magic useful to modern people, because a lot of people use the word magic to mean impossible things that can't possibly be done, or they think of fantasy fireballs and this sort of thing. Magic, I'd adapt a definition by the occultist Dion Fortune. So my slight tweak of that is the ability to manipulate perception in accordance with the will. What this means is magic is entirely about experience and perception. And people might go, well, then you're including tricks and you're including stage magic. I most definitely am. And the thing with trickery is that your entire perception involves trickery. And I believe this is a transhumanist podcast, amongst other things. One thing that science makes us very clear is that we take in only a tiny iota of all the possible information going on around us, and each person is just one human processor. So it's not so much that if you wish for something, it comes true, but if you look at the world in the right way, you'll see opportunities. And if you look at it, if you look in the world for enemies, you'll find enemies. So if you look in the world for friends, you'll find friends. You've got to dodge the shit, and you've got to make a wide catchment for the things you want. And it's like this little dance with reality. A magician is someone who's able to manipulate perception in other people. I think externalizing it to other people is very important now. We've had far too many occultists. Occult is to do with hidden. We had all these armchair magicians who have talked a good talk, had great ideas, but they haven't really done a lot in the world. It's time to get out and try and play this stuff. And one of the best groups of people, like Ian and myself, and you, Ryan, are the musicians. Music is literally a form of magic, in my opinion. Science has not quite figured out how it works. They've figured out enough to know it's a very strange neurological activity. But when you play music, the right music in the right context, people get up and dance. You can completely change how they perceive time. You can completely change their emotion, their feeling. You can change their heart rate. You can change their brain cycles. All of this stuff has been scientifically verified, and every musician who's worth their salt has figured out ways to do this. Cool. Hopefully that answers my take on those two questions.
Is there any consideration of black hat, white hat, grey hat, or other colours in your wizardry?
No. Look,
or rainbow hat?
It's not really what you think it is. In a way, everything's magic.
Yeah.
For example, a speech is magic. You can get a crowd worked up into a frenzy of hatred, or you can get them to crack their sides with laughter. You can make them want to achieve a goal, or stop trying to achieve one. So you're working on the nervous system again with words, because words, like musical notes, are human creations. These are not found in nature, as it were, lying around the place. We may think so, but human beings are the most remarkable of animals. Something happened to apes. And the latest writing on this, particularly from Merlin Donald, is that human beings didn't begin to become what they are by speech at all. Speech is an extra. Music is probably more fundamental than speech, as we know from people who have suffered from senility or Alzheimer's, who, when they play their music, they come alive again, they can sing the words, they can dance, all things that they couldn't do. They were in a comatose state. So music is probably more fundamental than speech, and probably poetry is more fundamental than prose. It looks to some of the students of the nervous system that the development of speech came from singing. Singing began, and bit by bit the vocal cords learned how to speak and make more clear individual sounds that represented other things. This is exactly the reverse of what we've been told by academics.
If you look into Oliver Sacks's works, the neurologist, he taught some patients to talk, and he observed patients being taught to talk who'd had damage to their language centers by having them sing, and slowly develop the singing back into speech, which backs up Jack's point there.
This period, we don't know how long it lasted. It's called mimesis, and this is the key concept. People were communicating through gestures, music, dancing, eye contact, touching. It gave them a completely complex new form of society that wasn't there amongst the apes. We were already human without speech. So when speech came, introduced terrible problems, because you can lie. And lying became a very common characteristic of human beings. So we've then entered into a world in which we've got two types of reality. The reality that comes from mimesis, and one that comes from using words to trick people. This is commonly found in people who are very persuasive as orators. And they can get people to do the most awful things by using this technique, where they look sincere and sound sincere and you trust them, but they're telling you to do terrible things. It also leads to the fact that, as is often said, they have eyes, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. People do awful things and no one sees it happening. They only see the good man saying good things like good intentions. How do we know they are good intentions? Because they say so. Is that enough reason? Why not look what actually happens? And here we get back into a new form of philosophy which has developed in the last 50 or 60 years, or perhaps a bit longer, which developed from pragmatism, which is look at what happens and make that your test. Don't look at what should happen, what you're promised will happen, or the good intentions of the person making the promises. Look at what actually happens. And as soon as you do that, you get into the realm of what is mimesis and magic.
Absolutely.
And this is so important. So I work on that entirely, and I've turned off the sound for many people for many long times now. I operate on this basis. I was in the square for 25 years or so before it was more or less died out for various reasons. And in that time, I never claimed to tell the truth. I never claimed to be sincere, and I explained what I was doing. I was trying to create fun and a feeling of light relief in my crowds. To do this, I took on some really dangerous topics. One of these is my claim, I don't say it's true or false, that women have run the world since the agricultural revolution, which means that men are in a position of slavery. But of course, they don't know they're slaves, they don't think they're slaves, but they do act like slaves. So this is I just point out the evidence for this. For example, patriarchy, where men believe they must have children. If you don't have children, you've failed. You're not passed your genes on. Immortal genes through other people's bodies. You know, this idea that fatherhood is about genes. Now, before agriculture, fatherhood was not about genes at all. It was about a parental role of a male for a child. And quite frequently, it was a mother's brother or mother's uncle that was the father. So, in other words, fatherhood operates if it's not confused immortality and genetic immortality. So this is one of the great breakdowns, was that women are now looking trying to avoid patriarchy, but they can't find a way to do it because men want to be patriarchs because they've got no other role. What else are they? Now, the role they can have, if they want it, is to be a sex object. Now, this is an ideal role for males to perform because they have to show off, which men love to do. They have to jump in the air and throw things around and play music and dance, all of which are what male animals do to attract the females. But in nearly all the animals we know of, in all the birds, it is the female that makes the choice. Yet the man is on his knees and begging a woman to marry her. This is a romantic love system which is completely screwed up. It couldn't be more contradictory to what's really going on. And most women, if you ask them, they'll agree that they made the choice. The man didn't see it coming. Often they don't know they did. And so they're already in a position of being a slave in practice, but in theory, they're the master, which leads to cognitive dissonance on a massive scale. And the poor men are trapped in this terrible situation. What changed my mind was my mother being a feminist and my grandmother being a feminist, who chose their males because they were in love with them, not because they were any use. My father was very shy and was too dreamy, not very used. He didn't like making money. He wasn't interested in that. And my grandfather loved horses, and he was a horseman. He used to ride horses around and so on. So I saw that in my family. And so when I grew up, I thought, well, I don't see why I should have to be a worker and earn money. You know, what you could do is have a woman who thinks you're gorgeous, and she'll do most of the work. It'll work really well this way, so long as women like working. Now, I'm convinced women actually do quite like working. It keeps them busy. They feel important. If they can control the economy, all the best, as far as I'm concerned, run the businesses. And the males, their job is to keep women enchanted. In other words, it's magic. Our job is magic. Their job is morality, taking children off, getting angry. They do the moral stuff very well. And you feel thoroughly guilty when everyone tells you off because they've got this gift of making you feel immoral and guilty. But if you're really well trained, the effect doesn't work. It bounces off. But you've got to be pretty well trained not to feel guilty when a female gives you the eye and the look and the tone of voice. But that's designed for children. So men who don't develop immunity to the female guilt tricks are the ones that they like best anyway, it turns out. They prefer a man who doesn't respond to the guilt thing and go all soft and obedient and apologise. So I was doing in the square, it was my main topic, was that who runs the world and how is it done? I also see violence. The most violent men in history have been mothers' boys, apparently, and nearly all cases I've come across. It's very strange. Not warrior types who respect war and fight their enemies, but the ones that are really weird, really odd, seem to be these types, whether it's Alexander or Shaka Zulu or Napoleon. These are unusual men. And you say, well, what about the warrior types who do it for honour and glory and stuff? Well, they're not so bad. They may have gone too far, but at least you can understand the display elements of a warrior as he charges into battle and risks his life and so on. And this can be very good, such as in the Second World War. Without men like that in the Royal Air Force, we'd have been stuffed. You need these chivalrous values. And we do have chivalry because of the remarkable fact that the Northern Europeans had a warrior culture, but it was cruel and very unpleasant. But the Arthurian romances came in. And when they adopted the Arthurian romances, chivalry became important. You begin to be trained to think of the widows and orphans and declaring war properly like Churchill did, not like the Germans invade you the next day or someone like that. So you think about these values, they modified the Christian love. Now, love is very important. And in my speeches, I said there are three things which inform what I'm doing. Love, and that mainly self-love. I cannot hate myself. It just isn't possible. If I do something bad, I soon forgive myself, and I move on to the next stage. So love of the Christian type, I'm very fond of. And if you love yourself enough, you'll find it spreads out to other people anyway. They pick it up and they feel this guy's really happy. He's not self-loathing and looking for a chance to attack you. He's easygoing and laid-back type. The second thing is logic. You have to think, well, it may be nice to love people. This guy could be really dangerous. If I trust him, he's going to do me in. So you've got to be wise enough and use your logic to analyse the political situation, which I'm doing all the time, particularly in what happened in America and China and so on, India, to see which way they're headed and what I should be thinking about my own personal support of certain people and other people I don't support. So the logic's there, and that stops you being spiteful, because love is there, but logic, you can do terrible things to people if you're clever, and really awful things. You can sell into anybody. You can make them buy encyclopedias when they don't realise they're no use. So this is the bad stuff.
Advertising being a type of black magic, as far as I'm concerned. Not always black magic,
It makes you want things you don't need. Now,
exactly.
What the schools are doing is one thing. They're training people to achieve certain goals. The goals are insane, quite crazy. It's about continuing a society in which we have atom bombs and nerve gases as part of our assumption we need them. If you have in a society which needs not atom bombs and nerve gases, you're in a suicidal society. It's going to end. So unless you have a government which can do without them and can persuade others not to use them, you really haven't got much hope. So that's a very big target. Going back before capitalism and nation state and the welfare warfare state, you go back to the feudal system. Now, there's a lot to be said for feudalism. Again, the Boy Scouts are a bit like that. There is a hierarchy. There's excellence at the top. The excellent ones at the top must show off well. They've got to wear good clothes. They've got to gallop around on horses. They've got to go hunting and fishing. They've got to lead the charges in war. The British royal family still insists that the younger members of the family, the males, must be in the army or the air force or the navy to make sure people realise that they're keeping those traditional values of courage and chivalry alive. But if you're run by capitalists like America or what's the name, or India now and other most countries in Europe, then the most important thing is to be a spin doctor. You've got to persuade people to vote for you. You've got no higher authority than the vote. Now, voting is a very strange thing. Voting is, in fact, a form of magic. You are going to trust someone else with your decision-making. Now, I can't do that. I can't vote. I don't trust anybody who says, vote for me and I'll do these things, because I look at their past record. There's no evidence they will, either because they're stupid and can't do it and think they can, or because they're crooks and are lying to you. So I'm not a Democrat. But I accept democracy in a very small community where you have a lot of contact, you know the people and you can trust them. But really, it's a form of representation.
That brings us back to pragmatism too.
Exactly. And representation is a mysteriously magical process. It begins with theatre. Theatre destroys ritual. Ritual is genuine and it's real because the people are acting out their own parts. A coronation is the best example we have, but also royal weddings where people are acting out, I'm going to marry this person, and he is, and I'm going to be the Duke of so-and-so, which he is, and I have the background to it, I inherit the title, blah, blah, blah. So it's all real. But in a Hollywood film or in a theatrical production, they're all fake. They pretend to be someone else. If you look at Greece, Greece was the first civilization that developed democracy and plutocracy, ruled by the wealthy. And they then formed city-states who fought each other non-stop, destroyed the environment, caused massive pollution, and didn't last very long. Yet they're our role models. We look at these Greeks and say, these are the perfect people. They weren't at all. They were mad as crazy people. Whereas the Persians, that everyone has to hate, were very much better people. They had everything worked out. Without the Persian currency, the Greeks couldn't have existed, because you need a currency system to run a plutocracy. But who issues the currency? Do you trust them to do so? And that's one of our many problems that are developed. We have economics without any form of recognition that someone's got to issue the money. We have a civilization which is heading towards a complete collapse of the environment, which is destroying very fast. And they're blaming global warming, which doesn't exist at all. It's a nonsensical thing. But what we have got is destruction of the sea, the land, factory farming, factory fishing, and massive tourism, filling the air with bloody pollution, and horrible bloody idiots crawling all over the planet. And they don't know why they're there, most of them. They've just been straight. Well, I've been to there, you must go and see that place. So it's nonsense. Now, the moment tourism and other things stop, as they have now, we suddenly see the earth starts getting clean again. It's being given a breather, a short breather. Now, we could live with enough technology of the type that avoids slavery on the land. We've got enough agricultural machinery to limit the number of people needed to grow vegetables without introducing petrol-powered vehicles and so on. It could be done. We can go back to a feudal structure where we keep and recognise Maori elders, Maori chiefs, the North American native chiefs, the royal families of Europe, revive the royal families of other countries that have lost it out, and bring back an idea of honour and chivalry, bring back the idea of glory and achievement. We could even have wars if we learn from sport how to do it. Because sport is often organised war, especially rugby. It's an excellent example of how you can have a war without killing people. All the tactics needed, all the courage, all the body contact, all the enthusiasm of the crowd, and you don't kill the enemy when you win, because otherwise you can't play again next year. So you've got to be careful. You don't kill the enemy. That's a stupid thing to do. So you're then producing a different society in which you put fun as your number one test. Because if you don't have fun, then why are you doing it? Because you like suffering, because you're a masochist. You enjoy being miserable, you like making other people miserable, and these are the Puritans. The enemy are the Puritans. Yeah. Whenever you see a Puritan of any sort, political, religious, artistic, avoid them, because they want to make you feel lousy. But if they want to produce a feeling of joy and pleasure and beauty in the world, then you're on the right track. So that's why I've introduced this idea, which other wizards haven't done in history. I can't find anyone else who's done this. In fact, I can't find a religious leader who made fun important. So what's unique about me is this concept of fun. I combine them into logic, love and levity as a triad, but basically that's what I did in Christchurch, and everything I did, people know I did it for fun. No one in this town thinks that I've got any malevolent intention towards anybody, except those who have a reason to say I hate women or some nonsense.
Except the Puritans.
Yeah, and they're the Puritans. And they're going to hate colourful, happy people, and they can't, because they envy them so much. So that's my take on this idea of what's the core of magic and where it goes back to, and how we have to go back now into past ideas, not to copy them, but to learn from the mistakes we made, not to do it again. But no one can live in a world where we rely upon nuclear weapons and biological weapons to keep our society safe and protected. It's insane, and it could go any minute.
I'd like to get into your theory of the blob in a wee while, and these sort of fundamentals of love, logic, and fun, and also Ari, some of your I read your blog post about inner and outer thoughts, and I'd like to have a wee chat about that a wee bit later on as well, because entities of the inner and outer nature have always been quite fascinating for me.
And I'm about working on a chapter on spirits at the moment, as to what spirits could mean in a modern concept, in a way that everyone could use the term instead of just meaning paranormal or woo. So what are spirits if without woo? But that will be published when it's finished, which will be a week or two. We
can chat about that as well in a bit. Sounds good. But before we get back into the meat again, which I'm interested in, it would be nice to get some origin stories. So I would love to hear the origin story of the Wizard of New Zealand, and then I'd also love to hear the origin story of the Deputy Wizards as well.
Well, I was an academic, in an unusual situation, because I didn't want to do this. It was like I was being pushed by destiny into this weird situation. I went to university 10 years after I should have done, because I was backpacking for 10 years. I couldn't stand being stuck in a university or a school anymore. So I went backpacking in the Middle East to see the old civilizations and to live in people who believed in different religious systems, particularly the Muslims. Lived in Tehran for 2 years amongst the Shiites, taught English at the British Council and the university. And then my wife got sick. I had to go back to England. What was I going to do? She said this would be some years in hospital, possibly. It was all wrong. The doctor made a mistake with the x-ray. But anyway, we found out it was too late. Had sold everything up and come to England. Went to University of Leeds, and I couldn't even get to university. It was too late in the year. All the courses were closed. I had got the necessary credits from school, the advanced levels, but they were all closed off. And also I didn't have Latin at credit level or Maths at credit level. I intensely disliked the Romans. I wouldn't do Latin. I refused to touch it. I like the Greeks too much. And as for Maths, I just don't like mysterious magical subjects with recurring decimals and pi. I think, this is not a weird stuff. I don't like this. I don't trust it. So I would rather prefer to do words. So my stuff was literally, I was history and English, that sort of thing. And then they said, there is one course just opened up, a new one. Oh, where's that? It's at Leeds University. What's the course? A combination of an honours degree combining the theory behind psychology and the theory behind sociology. What? Sociology, psychology? What's that about? Oh, well, it's the last course there. So I did sociology by mistake. Now, I think most people do sociology because they're antisocial. They want to change society because they don't like it. Now, I'm a very sociable person. I have no desire to change society with some session. If it changes by mistake, I'm very happy, but I'm not going to be basing my life on, like the Scientologists, want to change the world, just like people. If I want to change the world, I can do it very well, but it would be so upsetting. I do it for fun, and I can change the world, but it's very upsetting, and people wouldn't like it much, like turning inside out, for a start. So I did this course, and we had a very good series of lectures in sociology. They were all different types: Marxists, structuralists, post-functionalists, anthropologists. So I got a really good training in sociology at a time when no one was doing it. It was literally unknown almost at that time, except in America. So I got a good training in sociology, and I did well in my degree, and there I was. And suddenly I saw an advert in the paper saying we need a cultural organiser for the University of Western Australia. It happened that I'd already organised culture on my campus because there was no cultural organising. It was all sport and social. No culture at any university in England was ever being organised on any campus. So theatre groups, film societies, music groups, magazine groups didn't have any backing. They got no financial backing like the sporting teams did. So I persuaded all the other leaders of the various groups to stand for Student Council, and we got in so they could do it. So I set up a whole structure of sponsoring any sort of cultural activity that would otherwise perish from lack of funds. And they'd seen this. They picked up this when I applied for the job. You mean you've actually organised? Yeah, I organised University of Leeds. Did you really? Yeah, I was on the executive. Oh, well, you have done this. We need someone to do similar things in Western Australia because the University of Western Australia is very close to the city, and they run the Festival of Perth every year, and they run country music groups and theatre groups. They take tours around. They were very concerned with Western Australia, a very enlightened university. And they said, sure, but you'll be a lecturer. I said, but I've just put my degree. How can I be a lecturer immediately, just so I've got a degree? So I became a fully tenured lecturer from being just a mere undergraduate who before that was a backpacker with nothing.
The first in Australasia, weren't you?
I was the very first academic sociologist properly trained in Australasia, the very first. But I wasn't a Marxist. That was catastrophic. I was more of a structural functionalist. As I see society as a series of devices that, like a bicycle, it keeps going by implement. It isn't about changing the world. It's just about understanding how it works, and you've got to allow for this and that and the other. And then you look at the psychology that underlies it, and you look at the anthropology, which is about culture, which you need to have, because society is always embedded in a scenario or a culture of some sort or another. So all the social roles will be linked to belief systems and ideal systems and so on, and they're all combined into one big and complex society, which I really liked. So there I was in a University of New South Wales, being the first, starting the courses off, working with the head of the department, who was a social scientist who knew nothing about sociology, but who was a Marxist and was on a kibbutz for years, so you know what sort of mentality he had. And he was sort of setting up the department and got other people in, but I was being difficult because I began within the 6 months of being there, a series of classes later on in the day for people who weren't sociologists. Marshall McLuhan was the most important one I did, because I began to realise that the means of communication determines what you can communicate. The medium is the message, which is a very radical thought. People who live by literacy will think one way. Those who live by pre-literate will think another way. And those who live by electronic communication will think another way. And we're moving into electronic age. So he was making this point. So you get to the electronic age has a different model. The age of books is about sequential lines of linear thinking. So you think of time as a linear process, which is nonsense, but it would work if you believe in a heaven after death or believe in a utopia coming. If you don't believe in utopia or heaven, then you can't live in a linear time system. You just do what comes easy to best and what suits the environment. You haven't got a master plan of reaching this wonderful world. We're all going to be equal, and all the bad guys go to hell and so on. So that was the problem that I began to think, well, how can we make the university a more fun place to be, and so we can learn better? So I began to start the Fun Revolution and the idea of ALF, Action for Love and Freedom, because I could see the students were going to start forming Marxist groups who would occupy buildings and threaten everybody who didn't agree with them, because I can see what's coming.
When was this?
1969. It was coming to Australia beginning in 68 actually. That was the year I started the idea of a university reform system. We got a charter of reform for better courses, better teaching methods, and students to work with the academics in getting rid of some of the bureaucracy. Now, the others wanted a confrontation between students and Vice-Chancellor. And I said, no, we work with the Vice-Chancellor because he's the public's representative on the campus. The academics are just beneficiaries, but they're not running the place. And also, they're not responsible to the public, so they don't care if there's violence. It doesn't worry them. In fact, they might join in, but it will upset the Vice-Chancellor. So work with the Vice-Chancellor. He's the tyrant or the king, and we're the peasants. And we've got all these in the middle with all their big money and their reputations and their egos in the middle. We've got how do we bypass the middle section of academics, which we did with the help of the Vice-Chancellor. So he came along to the big meetings, said that he was bored too, and we've got to get some reforms. And this upset the academics, and they ganged up on me, really. And they stopped my thesis by saying insufficient progress. Now, as I wasn't allowed to speak in my own defence, when I couldn't even submit a reply to this accusation, they just sent me dismissed. I lost my job, everything else, because I'd been on a special tenure based as a teaching fellow. So I didn't have academic tenure. I'd given that up to become a part of this new school. So I was out of a job. There I was. Nothing at all to do. What the hell could I do? Well, I'd already had a movement called ALF, Action for Love and Freedom, and I was being called Grand Elf by the students, because as a sort of from the Lord of the Rings, and I did refer to them as hobbits quite often, because they were mind their own business, just want to get their lives through, but the others had big plans for them, and students were going to take over the world and so on. They watched, and this thing in Paris really inflamed them. That was Pol Pot type stuff. It was the Jacobins again, and the end of history. And
the student riots in Paris?
The student riots in Paris in 1968, just as I was founding the Fun Revolution at the same time. And therefore I now suddenly became seen as the man who's going to stop the student revolution. I was in favour of fascism and all that sort of non-favour of the CIA. So I suddenly became the enemy, and it was impossible. So then I became the wizard by seeing the vice. Look, the only way out for me is to detach myself entirely from any paid employment by you or the students or the academics. If you and the students jointly provide a very small honorarium, which is even less than a teaching fellowship, which is even less than my lectureship, by half and by half and by half, I'd be living on the smell of an oil rag, but at least I'd be free. I can do what I want to do and teach and get the reforms things through. And that went on for a year. But in the end, it was impossible. I'd be shouted down. I'd be assaulted physically. Everything I did I was the enemy. I was like Trump. I was just hated for no reason I could work out at all.
Was it sort of a dichotomy? If you're not sort of Marxist, you're a fascist, is it?
There was no fascist. They were the fascists.
Right, no, but they were claiming that you were one. Is that what I'm saying?
I think they would say I was a counter-revolutionary bohemian rather than... I was more counter-revolutionary than a fascist. Right. They couldn't find any fascist signs. I had no organisation, no money, and I just used fun. So they saw me as someone detracting attention away from the real issues.
Right.
So I'd be more counter-revolutionary bohemian.
Yeah.
which is a very good description.
Yeah,
actually.
that's great.
Except I was a fun revolutionary. I paid the price being revolutionary. I stripped down for action. And then I began to say, to survive, I must get rid of all my control systems. Around me, there are control systems. For example, you have the right to do this and right to do that if you join in the structure and get a license to do this. If you get a superannuation payment, you get an insurance benefit. I moved out of any sort of welfare state dependency. So I didn't claim any unemployment benefit, didn't claim any help at all. I became an activist in the counterculture. Now, they didn't ask Chris about who you were, so I joined in the rock groups and did things with the happenings and the hippies, and that kept me alive. At the same time, they quite liked someone like me because it was what they wanted to be, free and yet old and older. I was in my 30s. Very rare in those days. But I wouldn't take drugs, and I didn't believe in sexual promiscuity, which made me a bit of an oddball, really. I think that sex is extremely dangerous, and so you enter into it, I hope, with your eyes wide open, and you need to be sure that either they leave or you do if it really goes wrong, and that's very difficult, but you can't leave a woman without losing your honour system. So you've got to be so awful they leave you, and then you can be clear of that guilt. Because I see women as dependent creatures in my universe, not mothers anymore. So that's how it began. And the Vice-Chancellor, to my amazement, said, it does sound quite a good idea. You can keep doing your reforms and bringing music and hippies on the campus and so on. And the students have to agree, though. That was very difficult, very, very difficult. Why would the students agree to an idea from the Vice-Chancellor that was so radical? They don't trust Vice-Chancellors. Well, he's the enemy. So I had a special occasion. I put on a paranoid psychodrama in which I played two parts. The student radical, who saw it as a plot by the administration to silence student radicalism. And then I was the hippie who said these guys are all hung up on committee structures. They want to have your money, they want to spend the student funds, they want to control the student newspaper, and they want to make everyone miserable because they don't like fun at all. And it swung the meeting over when they realised that I could see the point of view of a radical and what their plan was and why I was such a threat to them. And I wore my black leather jacket and Mao Zedong hat to do the first one, and I wore a white nightie and a flowery hat for the second one, so they could see that I was playing the two parts. But I didn't really believe in anything very much, but I knew what the line to take should be, and they voted unanimously to give us a part to share the honorarium that the Vice-Chancellor and students put together. So we got a Vice-Chancellor and students jointly forming a backup for a wizard. Now, the wizard is the wise man, which means he has to think, what are the interests of the Vice-Chancellor? What are the interests of the students? Where can we find a compromise? How do we outsmart the people who want to destroy the place and break in windows and smashing and become heroes of the media and all their friends, and they get all the girls because they're heroes and so on? How do we make them look stupid? And that was the wise man's job, and it worked really well. Yeah. But it got so difficult, so impossible, I began to think of moving to New Zealand to carry an experiment in vanishing, which is that's my great experiment, how to dematerialise and avoid being immortal. Because I tried to avoid any form of immortality, no fame after death, no name after death, no children to carry your name, to disappear and be forgotten at the same time is the only pure acte gratuit, if you like, that I could make as an existentialist. So it's a very strange start, but I didn't want to do sociology. And the only other sociologist that I like is John Berger, who's also a religious sociologist, like me, in the sort of religion. He did it by mistake. It's called A Sociologist by Mistake. That's the title of his book. Brilliant. And he didn't fall into all the traps of the Marxists either. Well, there is another sociologist tradition, and that's the Weberian one, Max Weber. And he's got no followers. He's the great thinker of all. He's really important. And he said human beings have got subjective aims, which are really important to them. They're not just in the marketplace to go for the highest pay. They're not just the workers of the world. And they have the other aspects of, and he called the combination of the two, of the lifestyle. He invented the word lifestyle.
Well, I think a big problem for me with a lot of the sociology is the attempts to reduce it down to fundamentals. Often reduce it down.
Well, the fundamental unit of sociology is the role. But they don't recognise the role, you see. The role is the fundamental unit of social science, and it's been ignored. It's not in the indexes anymore. It's gone.
Yeah, but with that, that's a nice open category that you can use archetypes and all sorts of things within, rather than saying they're all trying to choose one metric, such as labour, and then in Marxism and try and...
Well, that's economics. That's not sociology.
Yeah.
Economics is a small branch of sociology, but it's become the key branch because we all believe that economics is everything.
There we go.
Ridiculous.
That's what I meant.
And now we're seeing a huge blow to the economic system. Wow! Because they put people dying as really important, and it's not. But they put it as really important. And they wouldn't fight a war if you didn't want to die. You wouldn't fight the Nazis. No, if you don't fight the Nazis, we can be all right. No one will die. Good plan, you know. So, I mean, it's like war. I don't like war, but so I invent a form of war, Alp's Imperial Army. Now, no one else has done this. They do reenactments, which are quite different, or they say war is a great thing as long as you don't get hurt. It's a wonderful thing. Children love it. Everyone loves war. It looks good. It sounds good. Uniforms and mess dinners and all that stuff. But it doesn't require killing anybody or getting hurt unless you fall over and break a leg, which sometimes...
Non-violent warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not pacifism. Pacifism is hates war and fears war. If you hate and fear war, you'll end up having a war in your hands shortly afterwards. It happened in the 30s too.
Right.
So pacifists are just asking for trouble.
Well, pacifism often involves passive aggression. We'd rather be avert about things.
You want to be a slave. Pacifists want to be slaves. I'll be a slave. I'm a bloody slave. And then they get the moral high. They get this moral high of being pacifist. I'm a pacifist. I'm a good guy, you know. Until the war comes, they all change immediately. Pacifists just converted to being behind Churchill in the war effort very quickly.
So Wikipedia has it wrong because it says that Alp's Imperial Army is a pacifist group.
I keep telling them, but they keep saying that. The guys in the army want to be holy. They want to be nice. See, it's not pacifist. I'd fight if they came here. If the Chinese communists came over, I'd fight, I'm afraid. I know it sounds bad, but I was in the Royal Air Force. I know what to do, you know.
Yeah.
So these people are being irrational. Again, logic isn't there. Too much love, not enough logic. And the fun thing should stop it happening, but they want to have fun and still be pacifists. You can't do both, you know. Pacifists aren't fun-loving people. They're terribly serious. They're probably vegetarian as well and all sorts of other things. God knows. Vegans, God knows how far it ends, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So the question was what my origin was as a wizard, as the deputy to the Wizard of New Zealand here. We didn't get into that either, just a short aside. As part of his origin in 1990, he was made Wizard of New Zealand by the Prime Minister Mike Moore, which is the highest achievement of a living wizard or a 21st century wizard.
There hasn't been a wizard since the Elizabethan period, really.
Yeah. Mike came through art and music. So, like Ryan here, our podcaster, I'm a professional musician, and I play around the city. I got to the point where I was just sort of starting. I was almost able to make a living from music, but I went through this stage that I think a lot of musicians get stuck at, is they'll play a gig and maybe half the time people are really, really into it and have a great time. And the other half of the time it doesn't work. And from the musician's point of view, that can be very confusing. I think a lot of people get into art for themselves, and it's possible that I did too. And a lot of people get into songs as therapy and this sort of thing. And it's okay for a while. And if you're really, really lucky, someone really identifies with your inner soul, etc. But a lot of it is wanking. And at some point I realized, wait a minute. I think I always had this kind of feeling of wanting to have people interact with my music. But I came across the writer Alan Moore, who was a comic book writer. He's writes novels now. He's most famous for things like Watchmen. A lot of films have been made of his stuff that are mostly crap. Some of them are okay, but his books have some really interesting ideas. And he's a fantastic entry point, what I'd call a human portal for getting into some of these subjects. Because he takes the occult concept, like Dion Fortune's idea that this is about manipulating people's experience, and he opens that up. And he said something wonderful. He said, I believe art is literally magic. He said something like, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, in the old days, magic was called the art, and I believe that to be literally true. All art, be it theater, music, sculpture, writing, film, I believe to be literally magic. Now, he goes in depth at talking about writing, and a few writers understand this. Especially Alan Moore is a great entry point. Ursula Le Guin is a fantastic entry point. She wrote to me the best children's book on becoming a wizard, which is The Wizard of Earthsea, which to me far surpasses Harry Potter. And in fact, Harry Potter, in my opinion, was based upon it. That's a very good one for kids who want to understand what a wizard is. And all these people have in common that they understand the relationship between magic and the word, the logos in Christianity, and Heraclitus, the Greek, the term logos, which is often translated as the word. It can literally mean words if you put it that way, but it really is the boundaries around which we see patterns in the world. So
Matrix.
Like a matrix idea. And a magician manipulates these. A magician can show you new ways to see the world through drawing new boundaries around things and create paradigm shifts. So I decided, wait a minute, every song I perform is a spell. And what's my goal? I decided my goal was to make people dance. I thought that's a good criteria because people only dance if they want to. Okay, and if they dance, it's a bodily thing, so it's not intellectual. So it's a good black and white tick off the box kind of metric as to whether I'm doing a good job or not. So as a musician, I decided I'm making people dance, and I refined my stuff. I believe in, I use and so does Jack, a philosophical school called Pragmatism, which I think the best writer of was William James, the American philosopher. And basically it is that you should always look for real change in the world before you decide what is true or not. Using pragmatism allows you to use things that you can't explain why they work as long as they deliver results. And so when Arthur C. Clarke talks about the difference between magic and technology, it's like, well, what do you do if you have something that works? Something like hypnotism works? It shouldn't, but it does anyway. I think it's literally magic. Placebo works. It shouldn't. It's medicine that shouldn't work, but does anyway. There's no active ingredient, and yet it works. In fact, placebo, if people want to look into it, is so fascinating because the reason that people do scientific tests against placebo is not because it's a real baseline. It's because you cannot remove placebo from scientific experiments. It's impossible. It's always what the doctor is wearing is part of the placebo. The color they paint the hospital is part of the placebo. This is true of music. The venue is part of the performance. What you're wearing is part of the performance. What time of day you're playing is part of the performance. Whether the people are drinking or not, sitting at tables, standing up, whether they walk through a special entranceway with a lobby like at an opera house. All of these things are part of the performance. So if you take, like they did that scientific experiment, which is a terrible one, but it shows the misunderstanding of music. They took a Stradivarius concert violinist with a Stradivarius violin, put him in a New York subway, and then a lot of people were very surprised that people just walked past. If you put that guy in a concert hall, what happens is people will buy tickets that are sold to them through advertising, which is a way of shifting people's perception in order for them to buy things, which is magic. Then on the day, you'll get more and more excited. You'll be told a story about the guy's qualifications, what his achievements are, what a great violinist he is. You'll go to a special opera house or concert hall where you walk through an entranceway, and as soon as you walk through the entranceway in your special clothes that you've dressed up to as part of the ritual, you've probably been out for dinner with your partner beforehand to make a really special night of it. It's all part of the performance. You're then given a pamphlet about what an awesome violinist this is, how it's a 300-year-old violin. This is part of the performance. By the time you sit down in the seats, you're like going, oh, this is going to be awesome. It's going to be so great, because the spell has already been enacted on you right from when you saw the ad and bought the ticket. By the time the concert violinist climbs on stage, they cheer. that he gets clapped. He hasn't even done anything yet. He has actually. It's part of the performance. So if you put that in a subway station, it doesn't work. It's the wrong context. However, there are types of music that do work in the subway station. There's that band, Too Many Zoos. They're a baritone sax player and a tenor sax player, and they do all sorts of stunts in the New York subway. Like they'll climb in different. They'll go in different doors in a train, and they'll do each play saxophone, and they'll slowly walk to the middle of the train playing music, and then they'll have a jam in the middle, and it's sort of like a flash mob mentality. There's videos on YouTube of people playing hurdy-gurdy and medieval instruments and things in railway stations and subway stations. That works very well. It has to have a novelty factor. So if you refine as a musician all the things that work, and you keep those. And here's the difficult bit, because this can hurt your heart a little bit, but it's absolutely necessary. Take that logical knife, the rational knife, and cut away all the bullshit, all the lies you've been telling yourself about what a great musician you are, all the things all those songs that you love that nobody else understands. You got to get rid of that. Keep the stuff that you like, that the audience likes. You've got to like it or you'll burn out. And then you'll find your performances get better and better and more successful. Suddenly, I didn't have bad performances anymore. The other thing is it puts responsibility on it. Whose job is it for the music to go well? I have a real problem with artists who blame their audience. I'm sorry, there can be one member of an audience who's a dickhead who comes up, and maybe that person needs to be kicked out. But the whole audience, I'm sorry, you're just playing them the wrong song in the wrong time in the wrong context. If they don't want to dance, it's your fault.
You've misunderstood the context of your music or your performance.
It's not even the audience's job to know what they like. It's the artist's job to go through all the ideas, pull out new novel ideas that are interesting and present them and see if the audience likes it. If you ask an audience what they like, then you will end up playing Wagon Wheel over and over. And this is okay. This is one way to do it. There's nothing wrong with it, but you'll get very repetitive, and this is what you'll find a lot of musicians do. So, treating music as magic suddenly gave me success, and I was able to earn a living at music. And then that was something interesting, because my whole life, a lot of musicians go through this. You get beaten down by adults who think they're meaning well, who tell you can't do it. You can't earn a living at music. It's too hard. No one earns a living at music. It's demonstrably false. There's plenty. Christchurch, just the small city, is it between 300,000 and 400,000 people, has a crap load of professional musicians. So it can be done. You do have to treat it like an interaction with the audience for it to work. So I thought, well, I've gotten away with this. Maybe most of the crap that people have told me is projections of their fears and insecurities. And maybe I should stop listening to what's gone before, or look for examples of people who've broken the mold, who are getting away with extraordinary stuff. So at that point, I thought, well, if music is magic, then like Alan Moore came out as a magician age 40, I'm going to try this out too. I chose the wizard because I was interested in the wisdom concept, because I was already growing a beard, which massively changes. If you grow a huge beard, I have people can't see me in this podcast, but my beard is longer than ZZ Top beards, which it gets
it's a long beard.
Yeah.
It's a very luscious beard.
If you grow a beard like that, it changes the way people treat you, and it's like the way you look changes the way people treat you. Women understand this a lot of the time because they understand glamour, and men should be learning from this.
As Jack said before, the theory of sexual selection. Yeah,
and in other cultures, men wear makeup and that sort of thing. And if you look at a lot of male exceptional musicians, understand that image is not a shallow thing. It's not frivolous. It's not pointless, and it's not silliness. And it is, in fact, it can have a deep and powerful magical effect on an audience. So growing a long beard, less effort, more attention. And then I thought, well, what else are people wrong about? I've been told my whole life that if you shave, people treat you better than if you don't. It's the other way around. So I decided to just declare myself a wizard to my friends. Turns out that having a friend who's a wizard is far more exciting than having an ordinary friend. So everyone got behind it. Again, this is something that shouldn't work.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, okay, this is okay in a small group. It's okay at parties. It's okay. My family and everything seem to think it's a fun idea. Where can I go next? And I thought about it. And I was like, well, I consider myself a skeptic, but I have one thing different to other people who consider themselves skeptics, and that is if you haven't put skin in the game and actually tried something out, then you're not going to understand it. Being a skeptic, and I've written an article on what a good skeptic is, which we can link or something, but should involve more than just coming up with reasons why something is wrong. You should look for reasons why something's right, then change hats, and then look for reasons that something's wrong. So I then looked at what the Wizard of New Zealand was doing, and I found that I live in the city just out of pure luck, and I've been watching him since I was a little boy, like he says, that has the most famous and oldest living wizard. So I thought, well, the logical thing to do would be to go and learn from him rather than to be out on my own, under my own ego. So, and that started a very close and interesting intellectual friendship that we've had for between 5 and 6 years now.
Yeah, well, we talk about music a lot, but even then there's other approaches. One is to preserve music, which has been marginalised for a long time. That could be folk music, it could be medieval music, it could be music from other cultures, and that also needs to be seen as a necessity, not just improving your own projection to an audience, but how can we save this music from dying out?
Community music.
So this is where Ian has led the charge in Christchurch. There were others before him, but they didn't persist as long as he has in keeping this ground base. The music they had in the First World War, for example, the Cockatoo Band, that last remnant of weirdo sort of working class musicians, not particularly musicians, but they represented what they wore, where they mixed, the attitude to life, and they just play old First World War songs mainly. So they're preserving something. The same applies to words. There are books. We've got all these books we can go back, some of which have been told whether they're fascist or racist or sexist and so on. But nonsense. You look at any book, really. Read Mein Kampf, read Das Kapital, it doesn't matter what you read. But I'm thinking of words. Now, my problem is like Ari's, and said, I arrive in Christchurch in 1974. They'd just completed the square. They'd moved the central part out and cleared it out to be an open area. And the council said, this is for you to sit in and relax in. That was all. And I arrived as a wizard and stood in the middle of a square and began to explain what a wizard is up to and this all these contradictions. What is who are the chosen people? The British people. Why is monarchy important? Monarchy is important because the things they would never hear in a school, never see in the newspaper, and certainly never read in any book written in the last 50 years or so. So I'm saying we've gone the wrong way for a bit, but don't worry about this because it was there, built into the city. We've got certain values here, how it was founded and so on. So here I am preaching the wonders of the monarchy, the importance of the British Empire, the tragedy of America bankrupting Britain and taking everything away from us after the war and going with the Russians instead of the British, all these mistakes that were made. And they tried to arrest me every single day for speaking out loud in Cathedral Square. No microphone. I used no swear words. I was keen on the Church of England as the best religion in the world, Romans and okay, but not as good as we are, and so on. All this sort of bragging and boasting about how great I am because I'm English, British, I'm in a wonderful place, New Zealand's a great place to be. So I'm virtually starting a self-love movement, to love what you are and enjoy what you are. And then when I talk about men and women, I don't say women are evil, I'm saying women are smarter than men. Men are pretty dumb, basically. They may do these awful things to men, but the men should have woken up to this years ago. How can men be so stupid? And they underestimate women. They don't realise how smart they are. So, in other words, but they do get the first go at us. As mother, they get the first chance. There is a problem of breaking away from the apron strings, but that's done by backpacking and travelling and camping and so on. You learn that you don't need mother anymore, and you can then love her as someone that did this for you young, but you don't need her approval in the same way. But this, we're up against another thing which Murray talks about, the placebo effect. There's also confirmation bias. Whenever someone says something that you don't agree with in your ideology, you then twist and manipulate facts to make yourself feel okay. So you do all this weird stuff. And the best example is the fox and the grapes, the famous Aesop's fable, which is called Resentment by Nietzsche and other people too. The idea that the grapes which are sour, but you can't reach them. They were sour anyway, and that makes you feel all right. So you distort reality to comfort yourself for failure. People are doing it everywhere, all the time. It's the most common thing.
It's exactly what I was talking about with flipping being a musician to being a role of responsibility instead of blaming your audience. It's exactly that sour grapes thing. And the other thing I'll just quickly add that you brought up, Jack, is when you behave that way as an artist, a speaker, a performer, or a writer, it becomes about community, like you said. It's no longer about I am so great, your ego or everything. It becomes about your special relationship with your audience and what is best for your audience.
It's about location, really. We're back to Heidegger. The idea that location is critically important. Human beings need a place which is sacred to them, the hearth or wherever your camp is, where it is. And New Zealand to me was the sacred place because it had been up with us in the First War, Second World War. It didn't need to be. They could have simply said goodbye, but they kept their traditional links with their ancestors, and this is very important. The Romantic movement went back to the medieval period and Arthurian romances to recover from that dreadful Enlightenment, which is all about machinery and money and slave labour and factories and so on. They wanted to break out of that, so they went back to this other period, and we can do that now. And Christchurch is well placed to go back to that Romantic period again. Now, Romanticism and bureaucracy doesn't fit well. Bureaucrats won't like it and will try and stop it, but the great romantics don't care about the bureaucrats because you're attracting people who are talented, good performance skills, and you can simply ignore them and do it anyway. And then you'll find that people at the lower levels of society, the hobbit types, who haven't got diplomas and degrees and bits of paper to prove how great they are, respond well to talent when it's done the right way. You haven't got to be stoop too low to please them, but the mere fact that they see you as eccentric, colourful, happy people who are doing these clever things will satisfy them. But you don't want to live off their money. It's very dangerous to live off people's money, whether it's taxes or rates or compulsory fees. I much prefer to raise money in ways that people are only too happy to pay. The first meetings of the party I founded in 1972, which was the Imperial British Conservative Party, and I cannot imagine a more unpopular party if you tried to find it. Anarchists are fine, fascists, communists, anything but the imperialists, British, in Australia, and we charged at the door. Yeah. We made them pay to come in. And when they came in, there was music. And what was the music? It was a band playing on artificial limbs.
Oh, wow.
And then I added to this my own additional verses to the Vicar of Bray, explaining how the monarchy adapts and changes. The average intellectual, like a priest, would adapt and change his theory to fit with the boss, which they always do. You cannot trust intellectuals to anything else but change to suit the boss. They're not going to stand up for truth and honesty. Don't expect them to, But those who will do so are those who have a system of honour. And that honour system is not found in intellectuals very often. They're a pretty nasty lot, basically, by and large. Clever but treacherous. There's a very good book on intellectuals by Johnson, which goes into the lives of the famous intellectuals. They're a pretty nasty collection. I wouldn't have to do with that lot. But people who live the good life are contributing to what is the greatest artwork of all, the creation of a human being. If we can create the perfect human being, that is the greatest artwork we can achieve. And I achieved most of that when in 1972, with the help of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the director of the National Gallery Victoria, the process began of declaring that I was a living work of art. No one has achieved this title until it was officially done in New Zealand. Who by? The people who tell you what art is, the New Zealand Art Gallery Directors Council. If they say a work of art, who's going to argue with that? There are no other ones. People say they are, but they're not. To do this, you have to have no attachments to the prosaic world of money and material things you have to live. And for this, to do this properly, you need a curator. And who makes a better curator than your beloved slave woman who adores you, who's fallen in love with you, who thinks you're important, and who doesn't act like a mother, or may try, but I mean, it's going to be the sort of woman that you can form a special relationship. Now, this is where I go back to alchemy. The last time anyone ever tried to work out a balance between male and female was by the alchemists, who were trying to create a spiritual gold, not material gold much. And that means you have to recognise that the opposites are going to have an attraction, that you can actually have opposition, which is creative. The conjunctio oppositorum, which is the interaction of opposites. And if you can't accept opposition, you become one-dimensional. And that's when it goes right into hell, terrible thing. You have to accept, like I've turned the universe inside out. And this is another part of when I came to Christchurch. I've explained that there is no evidence that the Earth is a tiny sphere surrounded by a huge universe. It's a model. Another model is the Earth is a huge hole, if you like, a hole or a gap, and the universe is inside the Earth. And there is no observation you can make to prove it. So I've just changed the entire universe, single-handed. I've created art, and I did it as a work of art. To me, the universe is now a work of art. It's not a thing in space. It's a human creation. I can find no evidence that God made it, or it made itself. It's made by men. Human beings have always created reality, and they live in virtual reality, and there is no escaping. We cannot get into the real world, because real is what the boss says it is every damn time. You'll find the word real, it's what the boss says. All right, that's it. Who's the boss?
Which is why you're always going to encounter magic whether you like it or not.
Because undifferentiated reality would be completely incomprehensible to ape mind.
Now, I frame the universe to make human beings the most important part, and the sun, the moon, the stars, trivial, almost unimportant. Now, how many astrophysicists are going to like that idea?
Yeah.
They hate it, and they won't even talk about the idea that there's no absolute frame. I haven't found one program on television by an astrophysicist who even admits there's no absolute frame.
Well, the first problem you have is the fact that almost all human beings are currently on Earth. So almost all observations, it would stand to reason that you'd make, most of the time, for most purposes, Earth the center of your observation point. And yet they have this thing where they say, well, the sun's at the center. People believe this like it's some fundamental truth, and they get really angry if you say anything else.
It's useful fix for navigators, that's why.
It might be pragmatic.
It's pragmatic for mathematicians.
Yeah.
And also
that's the only reason. The maths lines up more easily. Here's
an interesting illustration of this. The Pope had to maintain control of the peasants all over Europe. And the Bible says it's flat, the Earth's flat. The Pope said, I know it's not flat because the navigators, but the navigators can assume that it's not flat, but the people will think it's flat, and we'll have that too. We've got it now. The government is saying the Earth is a sphere that goes around the sun. They're saying it's not, but they're saying that because people they'll be upset if you say anything else. They get really upset. So they have double standards, and that's what I think.
Yeah. So the truth is that there are nothing in the universe is stationary compared to measuring it against anything else in the universe. So like Jack says, the observation points are completely arbitrary. So choosing the sun as the center lines certain numbers up and makes certain mathematics more useful. But the sun is in an orbital and vibrational relationship with other objects like the rest of the galaxy and the proposed big black hole at the center of that. And that moves around in relationship to other galaxies. So I'd say having a geocentric universe is fine as long as you're happy to have spirographic movements of stars in the sky that dance around in like kind of zigzaggy, interesting ways. there's nothing wrong with that. It
It
just
works
might
for
make it
navigation.
harder to figure out.
It's good for navigation.
Good for navigation.
The Ptolemaic epicycles work perfectly well for
Yeah.
most ships.
It's good for
But if you're sending missiles out, it won't work at all well.
yeah, it's good for observing things on Earth, and it's not good for ballistics, as Jack's pointed out.
So this is the problem. Who's going to be boss? Then we're back to Humpty Dumpty. When I say a word, it means what I want it to mean. And the question is, which is to be master? First of all, I think very few men on earth are not controlled by women. Secondly, those who are controlled by women don't give a stuff for anything and are probably happy fishing and hunting and not bothering anybody. So if you can get people who are both intellectually sophisticated, know the theories and have read modern physics and quantum theory, but have also broken free from control by the women because they know feminists who don't want control. They really don't want it. They want to live their own bloody lives and not be bossed around by you. And if you object to them bossing you around, they don't mind at all because, just you do your stuff, they don't care. So this is how you get this big shift, the inner space of male and female who are united psychologically, socially and culturally. There is nowhere dividing men and women psychologically, socially or culturally. But the interaction between them can be tweaked and improved. And the way to do it is with fun. It's the only way that it'll work. And if we are the great gifted show-offs and ego trippers, then it's our job to do this. You cannot expect women to change the world up to men. And what they change is essentially themselves to become less power control, more magic and art control, and therefore enchant the women of the world, and they can control the idiot men because there are lots of men around so stupid. You need women to control them. They're hopeless. And the good bossy women will keep them in their place. And that would be 90% of men, I think, are really stupid and dangerous. So women can control them, and then we start rearing boys to leave mother as early as possible and join the Scouts and the Cubs, because that's what the hunter-gatherers did. They didn't allow any boy to stay with their mothers after the age of 7 all the time, or even very often, because they knew they would eventually end up being sucked into the woman's soul. They'd become like the woman. They wouldn't become like a man. So off you go and help the men out. And small boys love to join the men and carry things for them and do jobs for them and be important. And we're men round here, sort of bloody women. And this wonderful pride in being male is now hated and despised by every intellectual on earth. There's hardly any intellectuals have any time at all for men. It's ridiculous. It's man-hating on a massive scale. You have to hate women, but I love women, which means you forgive them. They're going to do a lot of nasty things, and they can't help it, because they're like men. They have their own way of doing things. And if you get in the way of charging rhinoceros, it's your own silly fault. So you can see the radical nature of being a wizard, this wizard, because they others weren't as radical. I'm probably the most radical thinker because of this, living in virtual reality since 1970, having several universes, and I adopt the one I find most convenient, living in useful fictions. I accept useful fiction, the dollar in New Zealand as the currency. I know it's a made-up thing, but I accept that, I accept driving on the left-hand side of the road. If I was somewhere else, I might drive on the right. You just live by going through the motions, good manners, politeness, and a few jokes. You can get through remarkably well. But how many wizards would have that category? They want to be too powerful and do great things and be important and so on. Ego problems. But if you want to vanish and be forgotten as your major aim, which I can't do now, unfortunately, but I did try, would be the sure sign that your ego is under your own control.
It's the ability to deflate or inflate your ego, as is pragmatically
As
optimal.
Jesus said, sit below the salt, says Jesus. But he's the Son of God in other statements.
Yeah, right.
Pretty good, actually.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a wee bit about your concept of the blob, and I want to talk about these terms of affectivity and instrumentalism and the interplay between the two, and how they map out on this linear scale between hunter-gatherer and globalist, consumerist society. What the blob is, what these two terms are, and how we undermine and fight the blob.
Yeah, how to fight the blob. Well, the blob is a conglomerate. The term was coined in Britain, maybe before that, by the Minister of Education, Michael Gove, very smart fellow, when he was referring to the combination of the teachers' union academics at university and other groups in the community to stop any form of reform. The children could hardly spell, they couldn't do maths, they were sliding down the scale, international scale, and any attempt to get reforms was blocked by this group, which he called the Blob, referring to a 1950s science fiction film starring Steve McQueen, which is about this meteorite thing which comes to Earth. It's very small, but it's got a solid sort of structure, so it opens up to anyone that comes near, an old tramp, and just absorbs it, goes inside and becomes jelly. It's pulped into a kind of jelly, then it seals up again. This blob got bigger and bigger, absorbing people. Now, I see this happening with all the MBAs. People who are experts in management are now getting greater in numbers and power than the actual professionals they're supposed to serve. There are now more managers in hospitals than there are doctors and nurses. There are more managers in universities than there are teachers and academics and researchers. It's getting to the stage where management has become its thing in itself. This was warned by Max Weber, who said we're going to end up with bureaucracy increasing and increasing. And I see it as a blob, so you can use it, oh, it's in the blob. Anyone who's in that blob will be controlled by managers somewhere and can't do things they know should be done. Even in hospitals, even in schools, they cannot do that because the managers will say, well, bottom line says this. Managers are essentially supposed to be neutral administrators, and I expect them to be, and we need administrators, but they should be clear of any other aim than doing what they're told in their role. But unfortunately, they have baggage, they have ideas of their own about things, which they bring into the mix. So they don't just serve the state, they bring in their own ideas into that, whether it's Marxist or Christian or it might be. At the same time, it's very hard to be neutral without ethics. You have to have ethics that are really strict to be a neutral person in this world, which means you only do what you're instructed to do and don't change it. Now, what we were seeing happening, and still happening more and more, is that any organisation which has an aim to achieve a certain state, they must be like a tool used to achieve a certain end. What happens in almost every case is they get bigger, and expanding the size of their organisation becomes the new aim. Not doing what they're supposed to do, but getting bigger and more powerful. They fix the budgets, they arrange this, they employ people they don't need, so they begin to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's an excellent article in today's press by Mike Yardley on what's happened to the City Council. It's just got bigger and bigger and bigger, more corrupt and more inefficient all the time. It's huge now, and it keeps growing. It's a blob. Now, the blob is not just functioning as something autonomous. The blob actually hates. It hates beauty. Because beauty is offensive to a blob, to a bureaucrat. It upsets them. They feel emotion. They don't want to feel, So they go for hideously ugly modern art, which they really like, because it doesn't upset them. They don't feel aroused and happy. They also hate truth. Any form of truth is anathema to them. It must be a lie. And the lie must be maintained by sheer violence. They have to insist on this lie, like the corona thing. We knew at least 5 or 6 weeks ago that the rate of death rate is about probably 0.01 or 0.02, and that it's going to spread everywhere you can't stop it. It's almost impossible to stop. Yet all the policies have been to destroy the economy of this country, which doesn't affect the bureaucrats who stay in their jobs, because they're all right, they're not have to worry. So let everybody else go to pot, let them lose their life work, their families who built up these works, all destroyed because of this their desire to stop the deaths. They're going to cause far more deaths by doing this, because of course people who would have gone for heart conditions, people who've got cancer coming, all those have been killed by this shutdown, where no one can go to hospital because they're scared. Or the fear. You need us, we can save you, we're the good guys. So the blob comes at you with all these good intentions, putting out virtue signalling flags. You can see them singing their virtue. I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-sexist, but they discriminate against men. Oh, that's not being sexist. But it is. I'm anti-racist. You're against white people rather than coloured people. What's this about? Well, you see, you've got to compensate. Well, that's racism. So the whole thing is based on lies. It also has absolutely no sense of humour. They cannot stand jokes of any sort. Now, if you try and argue with a member of the blob using logic, their eyes go dull and they don't answer. It does not compute, so you might as well talk to a fundamentalist Christian and try and get an answer from them. It's just no way. Their brains don't engage. They're armoured. If you try and appeal to their emotions, how sad it is what you've done to these people. Again, nothing happens. There's no love there, just power. power, the most addictive thing of all. But if you make jokes at their expense, they return. They do come alive and fight back. They'll try and destroy you. So now you've got the situation where you're like the hunter-gatherers. You've got to catch some really dangerous animals that could kill you with one swipe of their claws. So what do? You dig a pit, put some wood across it, put some leaves on the wood, go there, and then they come charging and down the hole they go. So strategies of this type is what I've been using since 1970. I'm an expert in guerrilla warfare of the mind. And if people would trust me enough to ask for what we should do, I can tell them exactly what we must do. But they won't trust me because I'm a wizard. Oh, you can't trust a wizard. Oh, you can trust a priest, can you? Oh, yeah. Well, you're going to get to heaven after this. Well, they're not nice, but well, how about scientists? They don't lie, do they? They've been telling a lot lately. Maybe the Chinese. Look, I'm your last resort. Who else can you trust? It's like the goodies, It's like I'm the good guy. I've been to the rescue. I'm St. George and the Dragon. And I can show, but since 1968, this incredible career. It's like walking on a razor's edge and dancing and singing while you're doing it. It's not easy to do, but I can do it. So you then say, I want others to do this, follow behind me. And we could deal with these problems like the blob our own way. But you can recognize the blob immediately. It hates beauty, it hates truth, and it can't stand jokes. So when you can get free of the blob, which you've done as a musician, and so has Ian, and so has Ari, when you're outside the blob, you can see it, what it is. You begin to realize, my God, this is terrifying. It's a monster from inner space. Now, the blob comes from outer space. This came from inner space. It's all based on psychological lies, sociological lies, political lies, economic lies. They make a fuss of the climate change, and there isn't any climate change. We're just destroying the entire biosphere. We're destroying the land with solar panels. We're destroying the silly blooming towers, which all rot and fall away, which pollute the world with all those damn new minerals they need for this, buying up the land. The sea is full of plastic and junk. This is real destruction, but no one sees that. No, keep going on the airlines, off you go. Tourism's fine, tourism, but you mustn't put this bit of stuff in the right bin. And so we've managed to distract people away from real danger. Now, magic is like that. A good magician will get you to look at something over here or something happening somewhere else. And if you make a fuss of climate change, you can do the other stuff. No, you're destroying the planet because you're too busy. We can alter it. It's all about CO2. It's nothing to do with CO2. It's not the culprit. So... And humans we're evil human beings. No, we're not. We're just stupid, that's all. We're not evil, we're stupid. We ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and became slaves of God and the women and the fertility and the babies. So why not say this? Sex doesn't cause babies. Babies cause sex. You can't have sex unless you've been born a human being and grow up and develop sexual organs. Or you can say sex causes babies, which if you like. If you make sex cause babies, you're making babies more important than sex. Now, if you make babies more important than sex, sex becomes a means to an end. It's a mere way of achieving something. But sex isn't like that. Sex is a powerful inner space magic. It is so powerful. The male-female thing is incredibly important. You're interacting in the inner space. What's going on is something so powerful. If that goes wrong, it's like rape, you can't do much worse than that, really. But the idea of this interaction of male and female is the clue to every form of conscience raising. But where do you find it? You find it in some forms of yoga, I know. But basically, even then, it's about the male, not about the joint one. So if we can only get to the point where we look at alchemy as a key to understanding that there's a male principle, yin and the yang, the animus, anima, that Jung is a very important writer on this. He didn't get it out right. He went from having a mother figure for a wife to wanting a sister figure. You a dependent figure, someone that you're responsible for. And until they can leave you, like a child can leave a mother, and exist without you, you've failed. Your job is to let them develop. Now, therefore, love between man and woman should be like love between a mother and a child. You begin by being completely responsible for them. It's your fault if it goes wrong. It may not be, but you've got to assume that, right? And if they leave you, well, it's like a child being lost or going on the drugs or something. You have to put up with that. But if it works, they'll get more independent of you every day, a little more autonomous, until they become really very similar to another sort of wizard-type figure who's also... But they'll do different things. And mainly it'll be about, I think, the material world. I got a feeling women are in tune with deeper things than we are, very deep stuff. And that we are kind of a weird freak, the male but it introduces a genetic scattering, which is important, I suppose. So in many ways, this a male-female thing becomes one of the key parts of the wizard life, because you can be a wizard who's on his own and doesn't relate to women at all, which is much easier, or you can go into the battle and try and survive, which I don't recommend when you're too young. So that's why the backpacking goes off and you take off and get yourself, so you know you can't be pushed too far, you can't be henpecked. So that would be a sort of thing that could be debated on internet. But I've kept off social media until my book comes out. Now, this book is designed to be it's an engineered virus. I've engineered my virus, this special virus, in my lab, which is a fun revolutionary warfare lab, to release in the community, which has the capacity to do strange things to the ideological cells, these ideologies. It creeps up on them, being fun. It also copies them, so you're doing similar things, and it doesn't know if you're a friend or an enemy. And then it goes into the cell, and then it all starts to laugh. So in a way, it is a new form of, that's why I take this image, because we've just been through one of these with the Wuhan bug. So there is a book which, when it comes out, will have those qualities. And I can only compare it with two previous books. One is Alice in Wonderland. It's called Jack's Adventures in Ideology Land. So we've got this idea of ideology land, where all the monsters are ideology and not being. And the other thing is that it has a connection with the Water Babies, which is one of the wildest, most weirdest, craziest books I've ever read, where he's punching out, he's attacking this, attacking that, all the way through the story. He's making these comments on this. He's a Christian evangelist, but he's making these extraordinary comments about science and learning and education, all the way through this extraordinary story, which ends up with Tom, the water baby, who's drowned, but he was working as a chimney sweep's assistant, bullied and treated horribly. He has to learn to become, a good person, bit by bit, and he's taught by two people. Mrs. Be done by as you did, and Mrs. Do as you'll be done by, which is the Confucian golden mean and golden rule and Jesus rule. But when he's ready, he says, you have to now go and find the man who bullied you and cheated you, awfully and beat you all the time. He's stuck in a chimney in the North Pole, and he's in great pain because of how awful he was. You can go and release him if you go and see him, but you've got to get there. How on earth can I get there? Well, you can't go there consciously. You'll have to have a dog, and you have to walk backwards or let the dog do that. So you have to follow this other thing. That's I call the lower instincts, the mimesis thing, where you ignore the words. And he has to go there and forgive his crimes, they're great things. So that's one of those books that affected me as a child so much. I think it's been in the brain ever since I read it. It's like Alice in Wonderland. You never get rid of it. It
was another mimetic virus.
Yes, that's right. So these viruses have got to be here. So can it work that way? Can this book do it? And I'd like to see this, but it's nearly ready. It's just sort of the illustrations are pretty good. There's the Alps Imperial Army in their immaculate uniforms with the Governor General awarding me the Queen's Service Medal. Terribly respectable. And then other ones of the Alps Imperial Army where they're dying everywhere and people floating down the river dead and so on. They're all having this big battle. Another one of Alice when she first sees me when she was very young, with this look in her eye and this scruffy fellow. It's a sort of young love thing. Others are of the crowd scenes outside the cathedral. Then there's ones of the census boat rowing out to avoid the census.
Yeah.
These images show that it's not just a book written by intellectual. This is the life. I've lived this bloody life, which is that the work of art has to live a life of action. It cannot be a life of writing about how we should do this. That's wanking again, the wankers. There are millions and millions of wankers and very few wizards.
Yeah.
Now, Ari is an activist, and so is Ian, so I'm very pleased. And so I presume Doug is really, that they want to do it. They don't want to be clever and read all the books and write notes on it and publish it and so on. But to do show myself to academics that I still have time to relate to, they're not really left, but I can say, what do you think? And I say, well, it's a good read. That's all I want. If it's a good read, it'll work. But the illustrations are mostly woodcuts. So it's got the title headings are made from Boy's Own Annual of 1905, with that wonderful period of Boy's Own annuals and ripping yarns. So they've got this sort of twirly, twisty art nouveau, I suppose, anything else type on the headings. It's got its ring bound. It's not bound normally, but the ring bound has a cardboard thing that goes over it. It looks like a book on the shelf, but it's a ring, so it becomes like a manual. Flip the pages over, and there's a whole section on being about the Jubilee year when we cancel all debts, which is very tricky. But I do lead into this carefully with loads and loads of social analysis, we can cancel all debts, just like Jesus cancelled all sins, because you can forgive debts, provided you accept people that owe to you. You must give them too. So it goes both ways. And that's where you get Jesus as the great liberator. If we see Jesus as the man who came to deliver us from debts, including financial debts, which are the same length, the same word in all the root tongues of the world, sin and debt, then we forgive all the debts. Then we can start again, and market forces can resume from the start point again, like a computer game. Back to the start, try again. Back to the start, try again. Now, history was seen as evil in the hunter-gatherer days. History is a terrible thing. We've got to stop history. How do we do it? We've got to start again. They could do that. They didn't see history as leading to any great place. So it's a disaster. How do we get back again? So this is an utter change from the idea that we're heading towards a glorious future. Yet only all our ideologies are based on achieving this wonderful future. And the evidence is exactly the reverse. The Earth, we've got nuclear weapons, we've got biological, we've got this terrible pollution. No one seems to care. The Greens don't care a damn. They want to give more people money so they get the votes. Have more jobs. You want more jobs. Greens, you want more jobs? What do you mean? So they don't want to see now I see the coronavirus as producing that effect. We can now make a big fuss. And the way we get out of it is this. Another part of my book story is the end of it, called The End. This is how you deal with people that are bureaucrats and have no skills of any value whatsoever. They're just paper people who tick boxes. What can we do with these people? They're useless. They're not workers. They're all right. They're not just ordinary skilled professional people. These are useless people, these bureaucrats. We need holiday camps. Now, I'm glad they put that Heidi High on television, because that shows how they work. People come into a place where they're not allowed to relax for a minute. They have to have fun all the time. There's nothing you can buy anymore. Dances, all these jokes and entertainments and music. And for several weeks, you bombard them with fun stuff. And then you say, it's time now to do a bit of gardening. What do you mean? Oh, yeah, you've got to learn to garden, because you're going to have to feed yourselves in the future a lot more. So we start gardening classes in the wintertime. Then they start planting little gardens around the holiday camp. Then they move out of the camp into the gardens and have little sheds somewhere, like garden sheds, and do their stuff. So you can begin to bring back the peasant lifestyle. And remember, socialists and capitalists both hate peasants. They really hate them. They can't control them. They can't tax them. There's all these deals going on. They're swapping there. They've got big families and we can't control them. The power doesn't work. So you think of the hobbits and Gandalf, and you see that this could be done. He looks at the human society, all right. He looks at the elves, and no, but there's the hobbits that he loves. And I understand why, because they have a sense of humour. They love jokes and pranks and firework displays and parties. So that's a very good, if you like, series of metaphors we can use to get us to go that way. You haven't got to achieve it, but even to aim that way will relieve people's mental anxieties a lot. Had enough. We've stopped. Put the brakes on this bloody train. It's going over the cliff, Let's try going the other way. Oh, I can't. Yes, we can. Especially going back to the 1890s, when we had most of the technology we need. You don't have to have slave labour on the farms anymore. There's enough little gadgets and various types where you can have some trains running on. We're quite handy. We're getting food to market. We've had trains and so on. And a lot more tiny vehicles, little rickshaw things that use very little petrol. We could do it all right. And that's where the great Druid wrote, Michael Greer wrote this.
John Michael Greer.
Who wrote a series.
A really good blog.
On how you could have different levels of technology. And the higher the technology, the more you have to sort of fit in with people and rules and laws. But the lower the technology, the more freedom you have. And it was a sort of a hierarchy.
So
this is
his current blog is called Ecosophia. People want to check that out.
I'll put it in the
So this is why, we can go for hours to do this. But you can see there's a lot of stuff there. Most people can't handle it. It's too much information for them.
Well, there's a few just fundamental problems that we have as a society for individual families, like you're saying, like peasants. What do they need? They need energy, they need shelter, they need food, and they need free information in the form of the internet.
And they need extended families, big families. But we could go out one more step to hunter-gatherers, but that's a dream to be Boy Scouts. But only a few could do that, perhaps. But at least that is a wonderful last point of this process of going backwards. The Great Leap Backwards, the chapter's called in my book.
Well, that's the thing, right? These four issues aren't that difficult. In principle, they're pretty simple problems to solve. As you're saying, if you can grow your own food and you have your own modest shelter and you have energy for heating.
Human beings survive this long, right? So.
Yeah. And information, I would consider the internet at this point to be
I
something
don't know
that's
whether the
a
atomic bomb didn't get
necessity.
dropped to be in that many bungles and near escapes. We're
Yeah,
still
yeah,
here.
yeah.
We're still here.
Yeah. I understand what you mean by the blob. And I think in New Zealand, for example, we have in the order of hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats here. Last time I checked, it was quite a mind-boggling number of bureaucrats here. And
Well, they vote in the elections, of course, and they've got big families, so there's going to be more people voting in the elections who are connected to bureaucrats. They're going to vote for more bureaucrats. It'll be covered in all sorts of fancy bullshit, but it'll be more bureaucrats.
I kind of enjoy this sort of metaphor of the blob, or this concept of the blob that you've described here. And you've got these things, these ways in which it can be undermined and fought against. And I've got a few things here that I've written down. So we've got here the will to power, which is sort of defined in the blob. And then you have the will to love and the will to fun. You've got this idea of Pavlovian or classical conditioning.
Emotional conditioning.
Versus Skinnerian or operant conditioning. And you also have the fundamental human values of truth, beauty, and goodness. So there's a few things to work over there, but we could start with those fundamental values, because this podcast that I'm running is vaguely transhumanist, and the trend that I see happening is this sort of accelerated technology. You've described these Homo sapien hunter-gatherers, which is, for most of our history of a species on this planet, have been hunter-gatherers. And it's still what we're evolutionarily primed to be, and what makes us happy is all of the things.
They were terraforming. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Terraforming.
It's pretty impressive.
Get in science fiction novels.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you like comment on the transhuman concept? Because I have a few things I think transhuman.
Yeah. I've got a question shortly about that. But
okay.
So the trend is that we are, in a self-directed way, transforming ourselves from hunter-gatherer stock into something which could be called transhumanists, which is this sort of transitory species, which might be this technologically augmented species that we are now. We have digital identities and extensions of our brain and memory through technology. And then you end up in a post-human world where you have massive diversification of species that can no longer be described as Homo sapien hunter-gatherer apes.
It'd be artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, but also augmented humans, genetically modified humans, all
How
that
can you
sort of
augment
stuff.
a human being except genetically? Like by reproduction with the best people?
Oh, prosthetics.
Oh, prosthetics. That gets terrible feedback problems from that.
Oh, there's all sorts of issues, but if you
Terrible
extrapolate it
and
far enough.
mimetically reproducing through ideas rather than through genetics.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If we can reduce,
Mimetics is another one. Yeah.
Imagine a society where the most cleverest, smartest, most innovative men are showing off like mad. And polygamy develops, which was the way human beings are meant to be anyway. Polygamy is the normal thing for human beings. It means that the inferior males don't reproduce and these smart ones have more offspring. So you're improving the genetic stock very fast, and without machinery.
If that was the case, why is it that most intelligent people are not having large families anymore?
Oh, that happens anyway. That is obviously stupid. You only have large families to help you to exploit the child labour.
See,
That's
I
what they
would
had them
say
for.
that,
They didn't have because they love children. Don't believe that, do you?
So I would say that a huge amount of people actually heading towards the majority have decided not to reproduce through children anymore, but to reproduce through ideas, which is why you get so many women interested in the feminist paradigm and having careers instead of children. There's so many couples now deciding not to have children. I think if you look at abstract ideas and our ability to abstract intellectually, all of those things piggyback on more primitive parts of the brain. So it can be shown when you dream about running or think about running even, that very similar parts of the brain light up in scans than when you're actually running. I would say likewise, many of our creative and ambitious pursuits piggyback on the what was previously sexual selection, so that the human brain has done this flip because we can think abstractly, where we do not only reproduce through having children, but we now reproduce through ideas. And this is the great drive of artists and novelists and things. And so when you say transhumanist, we are already there, and we've been there since the written word you say externalizing our memory through extraordinary things. Writing books was already a way to extend yourself through to this portal that's one directional, but it means I can read a 1,000-year-old book and go back to the state of mind of the person who wrote it, which is a little reproduction of an aspect of their personality that they wanted to reproduce in the world.
Literate people think differently about these things than
They do.
pre-literate people, and
They
you
do,
get a
yeah.
shift, which is a very dangerous shift away from pre-literacy.
All of these things have these side effects, absolutely. So
We are being redeemed by electronic communication. It's saving us. First of all, our images of the universe are not a machine now. It's an information flow, which is a much better image than a machine with cogs in it. And so in a way, electricity is taking us back to hunter-gatherer mentalities. Has that effect?
yes, the image idea has almost taken us back to the idea of when art was the main, art, dancing and performance was the main
Pavlovian
mode
conditioning
of
in every television set. Pavlovian conditioning, and
of
the schools are trying to
communication.
stop it, but they can't.
even, which, as Jack said, I believe he could be right, which might even predate language. There might have been dancing, and probably was, because you see it in the animal kingdom before we learned to speak. There might have been singing wordlessly before we learned to talk. And so I don't quite understand what the transhumanist means. I think there's three misunderstandings. One, I think we already have been reproducing without bodies.
Producing monsters.
Sometimes not. All of this affects, it changes what
Where
we are.
when parents choose,
All of this has cons.
when parents choose sexual partners for their daughters and sons,
Right.
it's gone wrong, horribly wrong. The moment parents choose, and not the natural selection
right, yeah.
process, and that took place in agriculture, and it's gone wrong ever since.
Well, then
agriculture.
ideology is already affecting genetic
You're producing
selection there
idiots on
too.
a massive scale.
Then you can look at technology in two directions. I think it's vastly understated how long we've had technology. I think any technology that isn't preserved in the archaeological record, we can't factor in. But there's all sorts of oddities like the Antikythera mechanism that shows that they had Renaissance level clockwork in ancient pre-classical Greek times. Stuff like it's a ridiculous machine. Like the Antikythera mechanism is a machine from what, like, I'm going to get it wrong, 800 BC or something.
No, it's much more like 400 or 500, I think.
400 or 500 BC.
That's when they began to get machines. That was the machine age. It began then, when they lost their gods. And the Greeks did not believe in the gods. They thought they were a joke.
And it's as good a piece of clockwork as you would find in perhaps the late 17th or 18th century. And it's completely real. So technology predates. The ancient Chinese had gas lighting. They'd get bamboo pipes and they'd pipe gas out of the earth and have lamps. Ancient Chinese. The technology goes way further back. It's just a lot of it was
That's the wrong sort of technology.
And wood and natural things.
The word techne applies to human inventions, like forms of marriage rituals, of ceremonies, of dances.
Too.
They're techne. The word techne means much more than something material.
Well, let's follow that line.
Of a mechanical type.
And like you mentioned, Jack, there's Göbekli Tepe. There's all these. There were cities in North America that you can discuss now. There was
out of the jungle in the Brazilian jungle.
And North America, we know about the South American. This is not pseudoscience. This is not conspiracy theory. This is just basic archaeology. It's just most people don't look into it. That there were cities not only in South America. We know about the South American civilizations like the Olmec and the Mayans.
No, these
and
ones in the
thing.
jungle I'm talking about.
Yes, Mayans and the things, but North
no,
America.
Not the Mayans. No, in the huge rainforest of the Amazon.
Absolutely.
There are big cities in those rainforests.
There are. We're discovering
which we never
those
knew
too.
About.
They're just under all there, and now that we can do scans of the earth, we're finding all these ruins underneath the jungle. So there were millions and millions and millions. But in North America, there's some of the biggest earthworks that have ever been created, including modern, that vastly outsize the amount of work which would taken to build the pyramids. These were built by what we would have classed as hunter-gatherers, so we've misunderstood what hunter-gatherer means. And there was a city there of 30,000 people, which at the time, medieval times, was bigger than London at the time, which we consider a city. So at 30,000 was a city at that time. We don't Same with Polynesian sailing technology. They got all around the earth. They were best sailors on earth, and they go back a long way.
That's a good example of technique, isn't it? That's not building things. That's actually knowing about
No, I mean
things.
societies as well, cities, societies. These things go, more do we discover, and it's very hard to go back. We're human, I think it was 2012, I'm going to get the dates wrong, but it wasn't that long ago we added another 100,000 years onto the scale of how long Homo sapiens has existed as a species or subspecies of human being. 300,000 years now we know we've been
and we
around.
have not evolved bodily at all.
When I was a kid, it was thought to be 100 to 200,000 years. Now it's 300,000 years. What did we do with all that time? So that's the old stuff. The idea that what we're doing now is extra special. What we're doing now is not quite as special as people think.
No, I'd agree. It's been happening for over 12,000 years, this transhumanist change, ever since the invention of agriculture, right?
The last point I was going to make is the flip side. We overestimate how amazing our technology is now,
Potentially,
in my opinion.
Yeah, potentially, because a lot of people believe at this point, not a lot of people believe, there are certain people in Silicon Valley that believe we're at a very stagnant point in our civilization.
I think we're at a stagnant point, including with computing.
Computing, physics, all the hard science, nearly all the hard sciences, and biology, they're not putting any money into.
Parents can't rear children anymore. They're not allowed to, and they're breaking up and divorce. Any society which can't rear children with a set parent is doomed. And it's going faster and faster towards that state. As the welfare state becomes the new parental bodies, and they have these weird theories about, who the boss is and equality and so on. We're seeing the extended family vanishes when you move to cities, largely, and that becomes a nuclear family which is just about holding the fort until both man and woman have to work to pay the rent, which has now happened. And when women are told that having any authority in the man is they're being dominated and they're being oppressed, which is nonsense too. And then you tell children that they can leave their parents when they feel like it, and we get a government grant when they're 16 or so. I mean, this is just destroying the family, and you cannot go further on that path. How do you go back? Religion, the first step back. I think religion gives you ethics. There are no ethics in science. There aren't any.
There's one ethic, which is that it's good to find out new stuff.
Yeah.
That's a faith-based prospect. That finding out new stuff is always good. That's a scientific ethic.
It's a grey, white, or black box, and we just luckily haven't found any black boxes yet.
Yeah.
And people it's like magic again. They don't understand it. It's more and more complicated. They begin to worship it. Oh, it's so clever. The science that's the science, says Greta Thunberg. It's not the science, but that's the great key word, isn't it? This moronic child is now becoming a cult figure because she's so moronic. It's amazing. The sheer ugliness and horror of a child saying and doing these things is amazing. Again, the blob likes ugliness. It likes stupidity. It likes no ethics. It really likes that. Oh, no ethics. So the blob becomes the enemy. And laughter is your friend. It's the best thing we've got. The fact human beings don't take themselves too seriously means they'll learn. When you take yourself seriously, you stop learning. You're gone. The brain just seizes up. It's what Wright calls either emotional armouring or it's intellectual armouring.
So, I'm not religious. Neither of you are religious as well, but you're saying
I don't believe in anything, but I'm religious, very religious, but I don't believe in anything, but I like religion. I think it's wonderful. It's artistic, it's beautiful.
It depends how you define it, because I define religion as, I'm not a member of an organized religion, but religion as a term I think has to do with keeping groups together in common belief. Mm-hmm. And therefore religious type thinking comes into all societies at many different points, including belief in technology and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that I would say are similar to religion that we fall ourselves into saying aren't religions.
Well, religion is based on fertility. It's all about fertility. Its chief value is fertility. Nothing else counts except fertility and your immortal soul. Now, if you don't believe in those things, you can still be religious in the sense you realise that it gives people a set of beliefs that resist the blob. The blob has great difficulty with religious people. It really has to destroy them, as they are in America. Every single religious group now is being hated by every academic group just about. It's just getting really frightening. They find it a threat. These people are quite harmless, but they're still a threat. to their ideology. And therefore the family has to go.
What was your question, right?
Earlier we talked about these values that you spoke of, Jack.
The three
in your-
values, the Greek
got,
ones.
got my notes here. The fundamental human values of truth, beauty, and goodness, which are the values that you fight the blob with, and these are the values that are being lost and taken
you
over
find
by
that
the blob.
every culture has the same values.
So, how do you define these? How do we bring them back? Where have they gone? I mean, if you're talking about religion, I was talking about the Christian churches in Christchurch recently with a friend of mine. And apparently they're all, I don't know this, but they're all modern architecture buildings
Exactly.
with
Ugly.
quite horrendous pop rock, Christian
So they
pop rock
hate
bands.
tradition,
Ugly.
And
a
it's
lot of
like
critics,
lost
yeah.
all of... I've been to Europe. I've been to the beautiful ancient cathedrals
Exactly, yeah.
there that are just aesthetically
Magic.
incredible, magic, acoustically
Exactly.
beautiful.
Beauty.
And
They love beauty. And
Beauty, and they have the traditional old choirs and monks that do the chanting, and this
Music.
incredible choral
that's religion
a
that
cappella
we can
music,
use,
which
yeah.
which
It
has
keeps them
true
sane,
magic.
apparently.
And it's not about belief. It's about participation in a community. How you behave. If you want to see what someone believes, watch how they behave in the world. No one actually... this is a very controversial idea now in modern times, but it's one of the core problems with the blob. All the issues we've been talking about today, a lot of these come from this idea that what you think in your head is really important, and it is not. I'm sorry, nobody gives a shit what you're thinking in your head. All we care about is what you say and how you behave in the world. And if you want to see, I think we should get rid of the idea of belief being what you think, and instead it's how you act. So you don't you're not religious or you're not ideological or everything because of what you think. It has an effect on what you do. It's part of being a human being thinking, but what you do and say is how you will be judged. No one should be judged on their thoughts.
By their fruit shall you know them. That's when I use
Exactly.
that phrase a lot.
So a big church that with a lot of beauty with some nice music and everything, go along. You don't have to believe in it. Just go along and participate and see if it changes you in a beneficial way. And that brings back the other thing. What's the outcome for building a better society? We've had a mistrust of tradition, and this is highly, highly poisonous, and because people misunderstand what tradition is. Tradition, as far as I'm defining it, is anything that's passed on from human generation to human generation, which is the only way you get anything done longer than a human lifetime, because we've mistrusted tradition and the past, and tradition doesn't mean we do the same thing over and over again and never change. Living traditions change. They have to change or they die.
We're going
out.
towards a glorious future.
With mistrust of with a mistrust of tradition, the idea of new for the sake of new, we need to replace that with pragmatism. We need to keep the things that work, like growing a garden and having a stable food resilience. And we need to get rid of the things that are crap ideas. It's not a better idea just because it's new. And I guess this is the other challenge I'd have to some people who believe deeply in some of the transhuman values, like the idea of progress for the sake of progress. It's not always better because it's new. Sometimes some new things are quite dangerous.
In my book, I come back again and again and again to self-loathing as the problem. And self-loathing starts with agriculture. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're so self-loathing, this life has to be so awful. There'll be a wonderful payoff when we go to heaven. Or I'll be reincarnated a better way next time. Or else the power drive, which means it's so nice to get these peasants doing what they're told, build these pyramids, build these cities, and do all this work. Because it means I've got power over them, and power is you give children a clipboard and a pen and they're off right away. Be very careful. So this idea of self-loathing comes with the fall of man. We come back to the fall of man over and over again. Why do we have this self-loathing? And people who don't loathe themselves are really distrusted and hated because they don't show any signs of that self-loathing which you've got. So they haven't got it, so you can't trust them. And that gives you the technology to escape from the human body and the human feelings, and the idea that we're not a brain in a machine. For me, the brain is an organ. It's not a switchboard which connects up the other organs. It is the organ which dreams. It's the organ which imagines. It's the organ which gave us this wonderful, great period of hunter-gatherers when they terraformed the environment, painted those caves. I mean, and this is all we've got left after 30,000 BC, a few fragments of what was going on. Now, there were bad ones, of course, but it wasn't the way we see it. And the future is disastrous. No, I can find no narrative that doesn't lead to a terrifying future if we go this way. Now, is it really bad not to keep on going that way? Does it? What harm? Supposing we did it for fun, have more leisure time, and that was the worst argument you can use is fun, because they've learned to hate themselves so much that fun becomes something really scary, really frightening. And doing for fun is so trivial and pointless. What's the point of that? No, of course, there's no point to it.
Does that cover your
That's
question?
the point.
That's the point.
Or fun for
So
it.
why do they play football? What a stupid thing. You've got
Absolutely.
a pig's bladder and you spend hours training at the places, you kick each other, get bruised all over you, and you do all this, and what are you gaining by it? Where's the moral uplift? Are you morally superior? No. Are you more intelligent because you've played football? No. So why the hell are you doing it?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So sport is our way out. And in many ways, sport is the one hope we've got. That looking at sport, which is absolutely pointless but fun.
Yeah.
So, romantic period, revival, and spellbinding beauty. Thoughts?
Yeah.
What do we
it's that
need? What do we need to do? How do we bring back romanticism?
Well, by
and
being
love
romantic
and,
in our
and,
daily
and
lives,
logic.
we
And
become romantics ourselves. We
what
dress
does that
in-
mean? What does that mean, though?
We have to dress in a way which we think is beautiful rather than practical and useful and utilitarian and doesn't upset people. Secondly, you have to have some sort of craft interest, something you really like to do, preferably with your hands. Gardening's an easy one to do. There are other things you can do as well where you feel connected with tact. Tactily, that's why e-books are so awful compared with a book when you turn the pages over, and like the CDs compared with LPs, it goes back. So you can say that tactility and being in the universe rather than being abstracted from it. That's where this idea of the universe being inside out, it means I'm taking abstraction and saying this is an abstraction too, but it's ridiculous. Of course it is, but so is the other one. There is no real universe. There's only what the boss says it is. And when they get into the, what? Yet there is no other test. Who's the boss? All the time. Who's the boss? I'll make Jesus the boss for ethics. I think it's very important. The parables will work very well. And you can do that without too much disturbance to the environment. You say, well, other people like Jesus too. There's the Buddha and so on. But you need a system where you have simple rules you don't question. Like love. Love's very important. A mother loves children. If they don't, that's bad news. And so on. A man loves his wife. If he doesn't, bad news. So you look at these sort of quite simple things. You don't get too far into the abstractions. Keep to the basic stuff. Now, there are people like me who love abstractions. I'm into all the time. But I come back again. When I finish,
Wizards love grey areas.
and I
That's where
come back
we
again
live.
when I finish and get to the garden, or I start doing something silly again. But there are most people can't. My book is full of abstractions, all sorts. It'll be very hard to read unless you've been pretty well educated. But it is silly and very stupid. One of the things I like in it is a picture of Alice when she was young, and she's all curvaceous, and she's lying down looking like a houri or something, and underneath is my research assistant. I mean, you can't take it seriously. And yet she did all the diagrams in the book, all the stuff. She worked on this. So, it's just one of those, you get to a point where they're going to say, this guy is having fun at our expense. And that's true, I am. I love to tease idiots. I just love it. It's so much fun to get them. You don't have to do it by telling lies. You just explain what you're doing, and they have to try and figure out why you're doing it. You don't lie to them deliberately. You're just saying, this is how I live. Do you like it? Crazy, maybe, but I'm having fun. And then you get like children. What are they doing? Why do children go out of the house to muck about? What the hell does that mean? I'm just going to muck about. Perfect lifestyle.
Yeah, fairly valid thing to do.
And then you find out that mucking around is skillful. You learn to play music. You learn to climb trees, and you learn to be a mountaineer, or it might be. So,
But children aren't allowed to climb trees anymore.
Oh,
Can you believe that? I spent my life climbing trees.
So did I.
To get away from the world, up in the treetop and just sit up there and feeling above everybody else.
Yeah.
Yes, health and safety. Meanwhile, they're destroying people's brains.
Yeah.
They're destroying their consciousness. So if you realise that mental health is more important than physical health, then you wonder why people in wheelchairs and people who are crippled can do wonderful things. Because their body's all right, but my mind is what's doing all this stuff. Yeah.
And what about aesthetics? Because you've been a big supporter of restoring the cathedral and a big supporter of the heritage buildings.
It's very
that
difficult.
Same thing, beauty over utility.
But how do you define the beauty here? Because there are some people that like modern architecture.
No, they
right?
do, and they like it so much. When I say, but the cathedral brings in 300,000 visitors a year.
Here we go, your
it's
audience.
a big income earner. They turn off. Don't hear that. Didn't hear that bit. It's still, But look, I've just given you an economic reason for the cathedral. Don't want that one. They hate it. Don't just say it's no use. They actually hate it. It's beautiful, and you must hate beauty if you're in the blob. You've got to hate beauty. You've got to like modern music. You've got to like modern art. You've got to really enjoy
Do you think
this
they
stuff.
genuinely hate the heritage buildings?
Yeah,
Yes,
they hate it.
absolutely.
They genuinely hate it.
That's
They'll
quite.
fight
Don't
to get on
underestimate
that.
the blob. Don't underestimate what that blob's up to. It hates truth, like the global warming thing. It's nonsense. It's in all the mutual. It's nonsense. But millions were lining up because it means you can hate other people by saying it.
The question of, well, some people like modern architecture. It's some people like avant-garde music, but they're never going to be the largest part of the audience. And so if you look at the audience, and something should be there for those people, but when the tiny piece of the audience that likes some freakish aspect of the art, and I'm one of these people sometimes, should not dictate. I like some weird noisy music sometimes, but I don't then dictate
I pretend
that
I don't
the
listen.
entire
I
population
pretend I don't like it.
must like it too. That's when it gets really poisonous.
But they're morally superior.
You can have your one modernist building over there, but to
see,
knock down all the beautiful old things that have a tradition going back to our ancestors and all these buildings that worth preserving.
They really do hate it.
To
They're
replace
just
them
not
with
neutral.
that is to say that most of the audience is wrong and we're right.
Yeah, of
So
course.
would they also hate the old towns of Europe as well?
No, they don't. But they have to hate it when it suits them to get the commission for a modern building. They live in old buildings. A lot of these modern architects who are communists who built awful cities like the Brasilia and Chandigarh, these terrible places that no one can live in. They live in a lovely, quiet place, like the Communist Party in Russia, which preaches equality, equal size, so many square feet, live in a dasher in the woods.
Yeah.
So the argument...
Our main modernist here is Miles Warren.
that's-
Lives in a
yeah.
really ancient house, lovely gardens, all
Yeah, it's strange that,
sculpted.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hypocrisy. And the other thing is...
Hypocrisy. It gives them power, you see. It gives them power.
There's a certain age where they just can't deny that old things are special to people. If you've got a building that's 1,000 years old, it's going to be special just because it's 1,000 years old.
Yeah.
And so the argument I hear a lot in New Zealand about heritage buildings and our past in general is, that's only 150 years old. That's not very old. Therefore, it's not important. Therefore, we should knock it down. How the hell do you get an old building that's 600 years old if you knock down the 150?
Whereas in
buildings?
France and
It's
Italy,
a
they keep the old buildings, but they've got lots of them. We've got so few, and they're not the ones who've got
Yeah.
left down.
Yeah.
It's worse.
It's very. It completely reveals their ideological.
Look, most modern architects were
possessed
communists. They
brains,
really
you know.
were. The whole of modern architecture begins amongst communists.
And as Jack's pointed out other times, the modernist stuff isn't modern. it's now like approaching
Doesn't
100
say
years
that.
old.
See, modernism isn't a style; it's the truth. You see, it isn't. It's all about purity and hygiene and convenience for the workers, and you hear all this
Yeah.
stuff.
And that's really what it comes down to. It's not actually good for people.
What do you guys think of the new library?
Could be worse. It's not good. But
I thought it was. I was incredibly disappointed. I was imagining one of these beautiful old ones like you'd see in London somewhere.
no.
Yeah.
With the huge bookcases and something.
The
out of
old
Harry
library-
Potter.
The old library, which was the another building by the Measure of Remembrance,
Yeah.
that was quite nice. It was cute and charming, pleasant. The new one was pretty awful, but it was it was a good piece of modern architecture. In terms of modernism, I'd give it fairly good rating. This one is the box. At least it's got shadings on the side. It doesn't just present a flat surface. There's a
Yeah.
slight shading to it.
So Turanga.
Where are the books? But where are the books?
Yeah, well, there's
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
So there's lack of books. Turanga, people go there all the time. There's a beautiful area for children to play with lots of Lego
It's
and
a
everything.
social. It is good social.
I think to be fair, it's doing, and this is how I measure a lot of these things, it's doing the community some good.
Yeah.
So I think largely
Thomas
it's been a
Square
big
too.
success. It's not the most beautiful building. It's not, for longevity.
It's got no soul.
It doesn't
whatsoever.
have a whole lot of soul, but at least it's being used and it's giving something back. So I don't think if you're going to fight a battle, that's not where I would fight it.
I was just
Yeah.
curious on your opinion.
Yeah.
Look, there's only one great modern building, and that's the Sagrada Familia, which is modern, but it's incorporated such avant-garde ideas. It's magnificent because he's saying, let's do these constructions which aren't just straight up and down trees trunks. Let's lean them a bit and do this. And he was an amazing man and very, very, very religious.
Is that
He was-
the one in Spain?
Yeah.
Oh, I've heard about that one.
That's
I heard it's just
absolutely incredible, and it is
mind-boggling.
modern.
Yeah.
Is that
Because
the cathedral, the new cathedral?
Yeah, the Sagrada Familia.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Begun in
incredible.
1890s, I think. When I went there,
They
and
couldn't finish it because they had no idea what was in his mind, right?
Well, he had it designed. He used all these designs and models using. He couldn't use a computer, so he had these strings and he hung them upside down and worked it out. He was using everything he could to build something which is really modern and which now only modern technology would even attempt. And it's beautiful. Except the people who added the bits later on with box heads on them. He had these modernists put up these figures on the great Calvary wall, which winds up to Calvary. He's got these sort of square boxy heads, which is ridiculous, because the other side is he goes for naturalism on these figures.
Yeah.
I mean, but all the plants and the flowers and the beauty. It's just
It
stunning.
shows what we can still do. Yeah.
And it went wrong because it was the First World War. If you look at the buildings before the First World War, they weren't that bad. And some of the new English architects were building good, livable houses, which came on in New Zealand with the state housing, which was good, sensible, utilitarian housing. Wasn't too ugly. And the windows were balanced out, the right forms, the right shapes. But modern buildings are so repulsive. They're just boxes preformed in the factory, plonked into place, and the windows in the wrong places. They don't line up properly. There's no big door in the centre. You don't find the door easily.
They're not designed with people's mental health in mind. They're often designed with the opposite.
Physical health.
You get these big buildings.
Light and airy, good plumbing, plumbing.
All this
Especially
glass, so there's no
acoustically-
privacy. Acoustically,
they're
they're crap.
horrendous.
Yeah.
It's horrendous.
Yeah,
I'm boggled every single restaurant I go to.
absolutely.
Essentially,
I would have
I
brought that
can
up
barely hear. I walk out with my ears.
It's crazy,
Yeah.
isn't
It
it?
blows my mind.
And people complain about it so
Have you been to
much.
Sanatake? Have you been to
And it's never
Sanatake
fit.
lately?
No.
It's been done up beautifully. The
Oh,
guy
really?
loves romanticism. He's got all shields up there. He's looked after it. The meals are cheap. The drinks are cheap. And it's a marvellous environment. And it's magnificent. It is just, and it's like
great.
Harry Ells, one of the great men of our time, who did that idea that people want to get out of the city and go and build the places for them. It is an incredible place.
Sanatake is probably it's the closest thing we've got to a sort of castle-like thing in Christchurch, isn't it?
Yeah.
Up on the hill there. Yeah,
It's
I'll have
so
to go
well
visit
done
once
too.
this whole thing's over.
Well, I know the stonemasons well, and they are so happy to restore some of these buildings. They've done it very well. The art centre's been beautifully restored.
Oh, great
It's been
jobs
done
they've
so
done, yeah.
far.
Yeah.
God, it's great.
And the Trinity Church
Oh,
on
another
Manchester
man.
Street.
That man was a big man in the big, building business, and he got fed up with it. And he said, I don't like this sort of world. And he began to power down, got smaller, got control of things. He found a woman who was untrained, made a very good secretary, so she became really good at her job. And they had a plan, and they finally achieved it. A thing on the wall saying, no MBAs employed here.
yeah.
And it's like lawyers and MBAs, that's all they produce at university. They're pouring them out. They're the blob members. They do the blob.
I better head off soon. Is there anything you want to cover quickly?
All right. The only other thing I wanted to ask about was, do you have a favourite literary or fictional wizard, each of you? If so, who was it? Who is it? And why?
There are two, aren't there? Fictional and real.
Yeah. Fictional.
Well, those
literary.
that were wizards in my sense of term.
Or historical, perhaps. Whatever you like.
Historical wizards were in the 17th century. There were quite a few around. Bacon and John Flood and John Dee. There were quite a few around. But the church was going to kill them if it found them. But they found refuge in Elizabethan England, where they were accepted because that was a country that was pushed out of Europe and turned into a pariah state. And they had to use other techniques, which they did, developed a lot of them. The other ones, the fictional ones, well, I've always loved Merlin, but when Lord of the Rings came out, the fact that he liked the Hobbits and had liked fireworks brought him into, I thought he was the perfect role model in terms of fictional wizards, and also Tolkien's view of the world and how he saw things is very interesting. His knowledge of ancient literature, his knowledge of and the fact that he invent a language, which is so hard to do. You're inventing a world when you invent a language, because we live in language worlds, and English has become the one the world's in. So that's why I'm so interested in the idea of a British world, which everyone understands English and has their own little world, but that becomes the key one because it's got everything we need. They were the people who gave us a democracy, virtually, a rule of law, constitutional monarchy, which is the best form of monarchy, I think, and a wonderful sense of humour. It is so advanced compared to the peoples. If the world had the English as the upper echelon, bringing in the Celts and the other lot as the sort of pinnacle of a culture, and then all the other ones, the Muslims, the Jews, we showed under the Empire we could do this. The empire was destroyed by the 2 world wars and America becoming too big, and who decided that the world didn't like monarchy and shouldn't have monarchy, so they pulled the rug out from under that upper level. So that would be the 2 I'd put higher up in that one. But there are wizards like people like Disraeli, you could say, or Lloyd George or Churchill, had many of the qualities of a wizard. And even the evil ones like Hitler had many of the qualities of a wizard. In fact, they knew the performance skill was really important. How you look, how you move. And remember, the brilliant man like Goebbels with a PhD in romanticism romanticised, whereas the communists had no romanticism, and it was so ugly by comparison and so untalented. The sheer brutality was horrible. The Nazis were brutal in a very refined fashion, carefully thought through fashion.
So Gandalf for fictional.
I probably can't reduce it to 1 either, but I'll
Sure.
go with 4. John Dee would be of the wizards we know were real historical people. He's the most powerful one that we can verify as a real person. He pretty much completely changed. He pretty much created the modern world in many ways by being the first person to conceptualize the British Empire. And then with Elizabeth I, one
And
of the most incredible monarchs
navigational
in history.
aids, all that stuff.
Oh, he did many things that are too long to get into. But if people look up John Dee, he's vastly underestimated in history. Of fictional wizards, I'm very fond of Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea series and Ged the Wizard, especially in the first book, A Wizard of Earthsea. He's a boy who goes to wizard school to train to be a wizard. But he screws up badly and then spends the next decade of his life or so trying to solve the issue that he created. So it's very much about the responsibility of the magician.
And that's the book where Ursula Le Guin says that the coming of immortality destroys all the magic. The moment you've got immortality, the magic dies everywhere.
That's the second one, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I love Rincewind, if we're going on a more humorous note.
I thought Rincewind might be.
Rincewind's a great piss take. I think every person who tries to be a wise man is also Rincewind.
The whole series.
Rincewind's
on
hiding
some
in every
level.
wizard.
And the terrifying
Yeah.
Granny Weatherwax. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
And the wizard school with all ambitious intellectuals trying to get the job of the guy above them.
And also the idea of a calling that you can't escape.
Yeah.
Rincewind's an absolute chicken and a coward who runs away from everything, and yet he still ends up being a sort of hero figure.
Yeah, everyone got a spell in him, yeah.
That he can't use, right?
And the last one is mythical, is Odin, who is not a good role model. He's not a particularly nice guy if you actually look into the Norse Eddas, but he's a fascinating one, and especially the... He completely changed their religion by being a mythical figure who sacrificed himself to himself, which is the most extraordinarily bizarre idea. He's also the one, he's a bit like Hermes or Mercury in the Roman and Greek ideas. He's the god of communication and the god of magic. So
And lies too.
they are actually and lies, because he is somewhat of a warlock as well. So they are highly related things. The idea of communicating already brings in magic with it, which we could talk about another time if you like.
Yeah.
So it fits that very well. The universe now seen as just information, and that is the best understanding.
Ari, Jack, thank you very much for your time. How can people find your work? What's the name of your book? How can people find your blog? How can people find you online?
So as far as social media goes, I take care of Jack the Wizard of New Zealand's online presence. He has an email address which he may or may not give away. But if people are into Facebook, they can approach Wizards of New Zealand. Is probably the best one to approach. If they want to approach me directly, that's fine. I have a blog called Pragmatic Magical Thinking, which is actually a book I'm writing. I'm publishing each chapter up as a little blog post so people can interact with it. And then I have a whole bunch of music, arifreeman.bandcamp.com.
And there's a Wizard website.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a website for Wizard. Just look up Wizard New Zealand, and there's a Wikipedia page about my history, which gives enough information. But I haven't done anything in the social media until the book's out.
Yep.
When the book comes out, then I'm going to start appearing doing podcasts, which will cause a riot.
Yeah.
Absolute riot. Just what I need, a good stir. I've been very quiet for the last 20 years or so, sitting back. But it's time to move, and this coronavirus has made it perfect.
Yeah. What's the name of the book? Does it have a title yet?
It's got two titles, The Fun Evolution or Jack's Adventures in Ideology Land.
Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant. Hey guys, thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
It's
Ryan.
been a blast.
Thanks, Ryan. Very good. Good questions. It's interesting.